The pier runs straight out from the low bank, its pilings thick with barnacle crust that catches the first hint of light, a grey-on-grey roughness that seems to materialize as the dawn inches closer. You turn your head and let your gaze travel along the row of pilings, counting them without meaning to, the way you might count the ticks of a clock that has no hands. At the third piling, the one where you always tie your boat, the tide line has left a dark watermark shaped like a long, flat hand, and you note how far it has dropped overnight, how the wetness still glistens even in the near dark. This is part of your morning, the simple act of reading the water's memory from the wood, and you do it without hurry, letting your eyes linger on the tiny rivulets that still seep down from the mark, each one a thread of silver that vanishes before it reaches the bay. The lapping of the water against the pilings is a sound so constant that you only hear it when you stop to listen, a soft, unhurried gulping as the creek breathes in and out. Somewhere far out on the marsh a gull calls once, a single high note that hangs in the grey and then dissolves, leaving the air even quieter than before. You begin to walk along the pier, your boots finding the familiar spots where the boards give slightly under your weight, and the creak that answers your steps is a gentle, wooden voice that has spoken to you for years. There is a coil of rope resting on a cleat beside the ladder that leads down to the water, the same rope you used yesterday and the day before. It's hemp dark with moisture and arranged in a neat spiral that you made without thinking. You crouch down, the wool of your coat pulling across your shoulders, and lift the coil, feeling the dampness seep into your palms, the cold of the fibers working its way between your fingers. The rope is heavier than it looks, because it has absorbed the mist and the splashes of 100 mornings, and as you turn it in your hands, you find the end and begin to recoil it, loop by loop, each circle of your wrist placing the new loop exactly alongside the old one. This is not work, not a task that needs doing, just a quiet habit that lets your mind settle into the rhythm of the day. The rope makes a soft whispering sound as it rubs against itself, and when the coil is complete again, you set it back on the cleat with the same care, the damp mark it leaves behind already fading into the grey of the wood. Straightening up, you look out across the creek and see that the light has changed, though you could not say when it happened. The sky is still overcast, a uniform cloud layer that hides the sun entirely, yet the grey has lifted a shade, as if someone has slowly drawn a gauze curtain away from the world. The water beneath the mist has shifted from a colourless black to something deep and greenish grey, like the back of a turtle surfacing from the mud, and far out near the mouth of the creek you can just make out the glassy surface where the fog pulls apart in thin wisps. The mist itself is beginning to thin, not by burning off from above, for there is no sun to burn it, but simply by sinking closer to the water, settling down as if it were tired. You watch a long ribbon of it drift across the creek, shaped by a current too subtle to feel, and it wraps around a piling and reforms on the other side, never breaking, only stretching. The smell of wet wood rises from the pier, mixing now with a colder edge from the bay, a saltier breath that tells you the tide has turned and is beginning to push back up into the creek, though you cannot see any movement in the water yet. You walk to the edge of the pier, where your skipjack lies tied, its hull a dark shape against the faint mirror of the creek, and you step down onto the deck with the ease of long practice, feeling the boat settle under you as if it were a creature that had been waiting. The deck is wet with dew and mist, the planks scrubbed clean but never truly dry this time of year, and your boots grip the surface with a soft, sure sound. On the starboard gunwale, just forward of the mast, the oyster dredge rests exactly where you left it, the iron frame a heavy dark outline against the grey of the morning. You move toward it slowly, one hand trailing along the wooden rail that is smooth as bone from years of handling, and you stop beside the dredge, letting your eyes trace its shape while you listen to the water lapping against the hull. The dredge is an old one, the iron bars slightly pitted with rust that never spreads because the salt air seals it in place, and the mesh bag hangs slack, empty of shells, smelling faintly of old mud and crushed oyster. You rest your hand on the top bar, feeling the cold of the metal travel up through your palm and into the bones of your wrist, a steady, grounding cold that holds the memory of the seafloor. The weight of the dredge is something you know without lifting it, a weight that sits in the back of your mind as a constant, like the weight of your own arm. You run your thumb over a small dent in the iron, a dent you put there yourself long ago on a rock you no longer bother to avoid, and the rough texture under your skin is as familiar as the grain of the tiller. There is no need to do anything with the dredge. Not now, not yet. So you simply stand beside it, your hand resting there, while the boat rocks so faintly that it is more a swaying of the horizon than a motion you feel in your feet. The water around the hull has changed color again, or perhaps you are only now seeing it for what it is. Close to the boat it is a deep, smoky green, the color of pine needles after rain, and when you lean slightly over the side, you can see down through the clear top layer to the vague shape of the bottom, a soft, silty darkness studded with the pale curves of old shells. Further out, where the light from the invisible sun begins to diffuse through the cloud, the surface takes on a muted silver green, the shade of a polished pewter plate left in a dim room, and the mist that still clings there floats like thin steam above a pot of cooling broth. The reflection of the pier on the water is a wavering construct of dark and darker, the pilings doubled into long, trembling strokes that sometimes touch and sometimes pull apart as the tide nudges them. You let your eyes rest on this reflection for a long moment, watching the way it quivers without breaking, a movement so small it might only be the fatigue in your own vision. A breeze begins to stir, though stir is too strong a word for it. It is more a shifting of the air, a cool current that moves from the northeast and brushes your cheek with the faint, dusty scent of drying marsh hay. It carries no chill beyond the one already settled in your bones, only a reminder that the world is slowly waking, that the bay is exhaling around you. The breeze touches the mist, and the mist curls a little, edges fraying like old linen, and for a moment you see the far shore of the creek, a low line of bare trees and brown grass that emerges and then fades back into the grey. You do not strain to keep it in view, you let it go as easily as it came, your attention returning to the things close at hand, to the coils of line on the deck, to the bucket half filled with rainwater, to the neat way the gaff lies across the boom. Your coat has grown damp across the shoulders, the heavy wool holding tiny beads of moisture that you can feel when you shift, and you reach up with one hand to brush them away, the gesture automatic. The leather of your boots is supple with age, the cracks filled with years of oil and mud, and when you tap your toes softly against the deck, the sound is a muffled thud that the bay swallows whole. You notice that the tide line on the piling nearest the boat has dropped another fraction of an inch, the dark, wet band narrowing, and you store this information away without comment, because the bay is a clock that you have learned to read without numbers. The lapping of the water continues, a steady rhythmic pulse that seems to have a deeper note now, a fuller sound as the tide begins to push the creek water back on itself, and you can see tiny bubbles forming along the hull, fat little beads that cling for a moment before sliding away. The mist is almost gone from the near water, lingering only in patches further out where the creek opens into the bay, and those patches are fading even as you watch, thinning to a gauze that reveals a flat expanse of grey-green stretching to the horizon. The sky above it is still a solid roof of cloud, but there is a brightness behind it, a diffusion of light that makes everything look soft and slightly out of focus, as if the whole world was seen through a pane of old glass. You lift your eyes to that brightness and then let them fall again, not needing to look for long. The light is enough, a quiet promise of a day that will hold its peace. The dredge under your hand is still cold, still heavy with its own stillness, and you give it a gentle pat, the way you might pat the neck of a horse, before turning away and walking slowly back toward the mast. At the mast, you pause, your shoulder resting against the smooth wood, and you let your gaze sweep the deck one more time, taking in the familiar arrangement of gear, the culling board stowed on edge, the coils of rope, the cork floats tucked under the thwart. Everything is as it should be, not from any effort, but from the simple accumulation of habit, and you feel a quiet satisfaction that is so mild it barely registers, a faint warmth somewhere behind your ribs. A second gull calls, closer this time, and you see its white shape glide across the water without flapping, just tipping its wings to ride a current of air you cannot feel. You watch it until it vanishes behind the screen of mist still hanging over the bay's mouth, and then you are alone again, the only human presence in a world made of water and wood and wool-grey light. You slip your hands back into the pockets of your coat, finding again that scrap of rope, and you roll it between your fingers as you stand there, the cold air settling around you like a second coat. The pier creaks once, a long, slow sound that travels through the wood and into the hull of the boat, and you feel it as a vibration in the soles of your feet, a reminder that the pier is not a dead thing, but a living part of this creek. The sound fades, and the silence that follows is not empty, but filled with 1,000 tiny noises of the morning, the lap of water, the occasional plip of a bubble popping on the surface, the distant continuous murmur of the bay, breathing beyond the mouth of the creek. You lift your face and feel the faint stir of air on your skin, cool and salty, and you know without looking at a watch you do not own that it is still early, still the time before the world remembers to make any demands. The color of the water has settled into a steady pale green now, silvered only when a ripple catches the light, and you can see the bottom clearly in the shallows near the bank, the mud sculpted into gentle ridges by the ebbing tide, dotted with the dark bumps of buried oysters that you know are there, though you cannot see their shells. A few fallen leaves from the oaks along the creek drift on the surface, turning slowly, tracing languid spirals that follow the tidal flow, and you watch one leaf until it disappears under the shadow of the pier, your mind following it into the cool darkness without effort. The whole morning feels suspended, as if the bay has drawn a breath and is holding it, and you are part of that held breath, a patient stillness at the center of a calm that stretches outward in every direction. The dredge waits on the gunwale, the rope waits on the cleat, the mast waits against your shoulder, and you wait with them, not for anything in particular, just for the next quiet moment to arrive and pass like all the others. The dredge rests on the starboard gunwale where you left it, its weight pressing a slight hollow into the wood that has been there for years. You move across the deck with the slow, rolling gait of a man accustomed to the boat's gentle sway, and when you reach the dredge, you simply stand over it for a time, letting your eyes travel across its iron bones. The frame is a rectangle of thick bars, the long sides running parallel to the gunwale, while the shorter crosspieces hold them together with rivets that have never loosened, fat iron buttons that wear a crust of rust like orange velvet. The metal is cold to the touch, so cold that it seems to draw the warmth from your fingertips before you even make contact. And when you rest your palm on the top bar, the chill travels up through the bones of your wrist and settles somewhere in your forearm as a dull, pleasant ache that reminds you the dredge is a thing of the deep bottom. The mesh bag hangs from the back edge of the frame, a heavy net of tarred twine that has frayed in a few places where the knots rub against the iron, though none of the holes are large enough to let a market oyster slip through. The twine is stiff with old mud and salt, its blackened fibers smelling of low tide and crushed shell, and the dark silt that lies 20 feet down where the sun never reaches. You run your thumb along one of the knots, feeling the hard little lump of tar and hemp, and the texture is so familiar that it barely registers, like the feel of your own knuckles. The bridle that connects the dredge to the main tow line is a triangle of rope, each leg spliced around an iron ring with a smooth, tapered splice that you made yourself one winter afternoon when the bay was frozen at the edges and there was nothing to do but sit by the stove and work rope. The splice is held through 1,000 pulls across the bottom, its strands packed tight and sealed with wear, and you run your fingers along its length, tracing the way the rope narrows from the thick eye to the thinner leg, the transition so gradual that you cannot find exactly where the splice ends and the rope begins. The main tow line itself is coiled on the deck near the Samson post, a heavy hawser of manila that has faded from gold to grey-brown, its fibers furry with use, and you know without uncoiling it that it is long enough to reach any oyster bar you care to dredge, long enough to let the dredge walk across the bottom while the boat drifts overhead. You do not need to measure it. The length is a fact stored in your hands, in the memory of every haul you have ever made, and you trust that memory the way you trust the tide tables printed in the almanac back at the house. Kneeling on the deck, you brace one knee against the gunwale and lean over to examine the dredge's lower bar, the cutting bar that skims just above the bottom when the dredge is working. This bar is worn shiny on its underside from scraping across 100,000 shells, the iron polished to a dull gleam that catches the grey light and holds it. You trace a fingertip along the worn spot, feeling the smoothness, the slight waviness where the metal has been shaped, not by a file, but by the endless, gentle abrasion of oyster rock. It is warm in comparison to the rest of the frame, or at least less cold, as if the friction of the bottom has left a permanent trace of heat in the iron, and you let your finger rest there, weeding the memory of the work the dredge has done without you having to think about it in words. A few tiny barnacles have attached themselves to the iron just above the worn spot, their shells closed tight against the air, and you scrape one off with your thumbnail, watching it fall into the water with a plip so small it makes no ripple. The dredge is heavy, heavier than it looks, and lifting it even a few inches requires a steady pull that you have learned to make with your whole body rather than just your arms. You do not lift it now, instead you crouch beside it and imagine the weight, remembering the way the deck tilts slightly when you swing the dredge over the side, the way the boat responds to the shift, as if drawing a breath. The dredge's weight in air is about 60 pounds, but in water it is less, and on the bottom it rides just heavy enough to bite into the mud without digging in, a balance you have found through years of adjusting the bridle and the length of the tow line. This balance is not something you calculate, it is something you feel in the way the line vibrates against a Samson post. A steady hum that changes when the dredge encounters a patch of shells or a ridge of harder bottom, and your hands know the difference between the hum of mud and the hum of oysters without your mind ever getting involved. The bottom beneath the boat at this spot is soft, a fine grey silt that has been building for centuries at the mouth of the creek, and if you were to drop the dredge now, it would sink into the mud and come up heavy with nothing but the smell of decayed marsh grass and the taste of ancient rain. But you are not here to dredge this soft bottom. You are here because this spot is a good place to pause, a sheltered patch of water where the tide eddies gently and the boat can drift without interference while you go through the motions of checking gear. Further out, beyond the mouth of the creek, the bottom changes, rising into low ridges of buried shell that the old charts call oyster rock. And those ridges are the reason your boat exists, the reason the dredge was forged and the rope spliced. You know their locations the way you know the path from your door to the pier, a map that lives in the back of your mind and requires no conscious recall. And when you lift your eyes and look out toward the bay, you can see in the color of the water exactly where the first ridge begins, a slight darkening of the gray-green that indicates shallower bottom over the rock. Standing slowly, you feel your knees pop once, a small sound that the open air swallows, and you rest a hand on the mast while you continue to study the water. The surface is so still that the transition from deep creek to shallow bar looks like a faint shadow, a ribbon of darker color that curves across the mouth of the creek and then runs parallel to the shore, disappearing into the mist that still hangs low over the bay. This shadow is the oyster rock, and it has been there since before the first skipjack sailed these waters, a low spine of fossil shell and living oyster that rises from the mud bottom to within a few feet of the surface. The oysters on that rock grow slowly in the brackish water, filtering the nutrients that the tide brings in from the ocean and the rivers feed down from the hills, and their shells are thick and heavy, sculpted into irregular cups of grey and white and sometimes a faint purple that you only see when the shell is cracked open. You think about the oysters now without any urgency, picturing them clustered on the bottom, their rough shells half buried in the mud, their edges sharp enough to cut your hand if you are careless. They are there, and they will be there tomorrow and the day after, and for all the days of this calm November. Walking back to the dredge, you decide to lower it over the side, not to fish, but to let it rest on the bottom while the boat drifts, a way of feeling the bay's shape through the line. You lift the dredge from the gunwale, using the strength of your legs as much as your arms, and swing it slowly outward until it hangs over the water, its weight pulling against your grip. The bridle rings clink softly against the iron frame, a single metallic note that carries across the water and fades, and then you ease the dredge downward, letting the line pay out through your hands inch by inch. The mesh bag enters the water first, spreading open like a dark flower, and then the iron frame follows, disappearing into the grey-green with a quiet gurgle, the water closing over it without a splash. You feed the line steadily, feeling the dredge descend, and your hands read the descent through the slight changes in tension, the way the rope grows heavier as more of it becomes submerged, the way the pole changes from a dead weight to a live dragging resistance as the water grips the line. The dredge touches bottom about 15 feet down, a fact you know not because you counted, but because the line goes slack in a particular way. A sudden softening of the pull that tells you the frame has settled into the mud. You hold the line lightly between thumb and forefinger, your arm relaxed, and you let the boat's slow drift pull the slack out of the line until you feel the dredge begin to move across the bottom. A faint, steady tug that vibrates up through the hemp and into the bones of your hand. This vibration is the language of the bottom, a quiet, mumbled story that your fingers have learned to translate over thousands of hours, and as you stand there with the line resting across your palm, you feel the dredge slide from soft mud onto harder ground, the vibration changing from a smooth hum to a slightly rougher, grainier sensation that means shell. The dredge is not biting, it is simply skimming, the cutting bar tracing the surface of the oyster rock without digging in, and you let it skim for a long, slow minute while the boat drifts and the overcast sky presses its soft weight down on the bay. The sensation of the dredge moving across the bottom is so faint that if you were not paying attention, you would miss it entirely, a subtle, rhythmic tick-tick as the iron frame bumps over individual shells, each bump a tiny pulse against your palm. You close your eyes for a moment and let the feeling fill your awareness, picturing the dredge as it walks across the oyster rock, the mesh bag trailing behind like a lazy tail, the bridle rings turning slowly in the dim green light of the bottom. Down there, the water is colder than at the surface, a constant chill that never varies with the seasons, and the oysters sit in that chill with their shells slightly parted, filtering the soft rain of drifting particles that the current brings them. The mud around them is soft, stirred into lazy clouds by the passing of the dredge, clouds that billow up and then settle back down, erasing any trace of the disturbance within minutes. You open your eyes and look at the water, seeing only the pale grey-green surface that gives no hint of the world below, and you feel the tick-tick-tinkin, steady as a heartbeat. After a while you begin to haul the dredge back up, pulling hand over hand with the same slow, steady rhythm you used to lower it, and the weight of the dredge full of water and a few pounds of mud feels satisfying, a real thing in a world made largely of grey light and still air. The line drips onto the deck, each drop darkening the wood for a moment before being absorbed, and when the dredge breaks the surface, the water runs off the iron in thin sheets, revealing the mesh bag heavy with thick black mud that smells of the deep bottom, a rich organic scent like wet leaves left in a bucket. You swing the dredge back onto the gunwale and let it rest there, the mud dripping slowly through the mesh, and you lean over to examine what the dredge has brought up. There are no oysters worth keeping, just a few broken shells and a tangle of dead eel grass and a single small oyster, its shell no bigger than a silver dollar, that you pry gently from the mud and toss back over the side. It sinks immediately, turning once as it disappears into the green, and you watch it go without regret. The mud on the deck will dry and crust and be washed away by the next rain, or you will sluice it off with a bucket of water before you head in for the evening, and none of it matters because the purpose of the dredge this morning was not to catch, but to touch, to feel the bottom and confirm that everything is still in its place. You rest your hand on the dredge frame once more, the iron now wet and slightly warmer from its journey through the water, and you feel a quiet, wordless contentment settle over you. The contentment of a man whose tools are in order and whose knowledge of the bottom is confirmed. The mist has continued to thin while you worked, revealing more of the bay beyond the mouth of the creek, a flat expanse of water stretching to a horizon that is still lost in the haze. You can see the dark line of the oyster rock running parallel to the shore, a submerged ridge that you could follow in your sleep, and beyond it, the deeper water where the bottom drops away into the ancient channel of the Chesapeake. The boat has drifted slowly while you attended to the dredge, the tide pushing it further into the creek, and you walk back to the tiller and nudge it gently, starting the long, slow turn that will point the bow toward the bay again. The rudder makes a soft sucking sound as it bites into the water, and the boat responds like a well-trained animal, swinging its head around until the grey light falls evenly across the deck. You do not hurry the turn. You let it complete itself at the pace of the tide, your hand resting lightly on the tiller, your eyes scanning the water ahead for the subtle color change that marks the edge of the oyster rock. The rock is still there, its dark shadow visible through the clear grey-green water, and you steer toward it with the same instinct that guides a bird south, a deep, internal knowledge that requires no thought. The dredge sits on the gunwale, dripping slowly, the last of the mud sliding out of the mesh bag and falling into the water with soft clips that leave no mark. The decision to raise the sail comes without a conscious thought, arriving instead as a quiet impulse that rises from the same deep place where your knowledge of the tide resides. You move forward along the deck, your boots finding the familiar path between the coaming and the mast, and when you reach the halyard, you pause with one hand resting on the coiled line, looking up at the gaff that lies horizontal against the grey sky, the heavy canvas of the mainsail furled beneath it, like a sleeping animal. The halyard is a 3-strand rope of manila, its fibers worn smooth where it runs through the block of the masthead, and it feels dry and light in your hand, despite the dampness of the morning, the twist of the strands firm and regular under your palm. You take the coil from its cleat and let it hang free, checking with a glance that the line runs clear through the block, that no turns have fouled it since the last time you lowered the sail, and everything is as it should be, the line dropping straight down from the masthead to the deck in a single clean fall that sways gently as the boat rocks. Unfurling the sail is a slow process, a ritual that has no steps, but unfolds as a single, continuous motion that your body knows better than your mind. You begin by casting off the heavy canvas stops, the short lengths of line that have held the sail bundled against the boom all night, and as each one falls free the canvas sighs and shifts, loosening in folds that smell of salt and old rainwater and the faint, sharp tang of linseed oil from the last time you dressed the cloth. The sail is a deep tan color, like a dried tobacco leaf, and it is patched in several places with lighter squares of newer canvas, each patch sewn with a double row of stitches that your own hands made during long winter evenings. You run your palm over the nearest patch, feeling the raised ridges of the stitching, the slight stiffness where the thread pulls the cloth tight, and then you move on to the next stop, working your way aft along the boom, releasing each tie with a gentle tug that sends a small shower of dried salt crystals falling to the deck. The canvas rustles as it wakes, a soft, papery sound that seems loud only because the morning is so still. With the stops all cast off and the sail hanging loose from the gaff and boom, you turn your attention to the throat halyard, the line that will lift the forward end of the gaff, and begin the process of raising the sail inch by careful inch. You grip the halyard with both hands, one above the other, and take up the slack until you feel the weight of the gaff and the bundled canvas settle into your arms, a dead weight that is not heavy so much as it is resistant, as if the sail is reluctant to leave the deck. Then you begin to pull, a long, steady motion that starts in your shoulders and travels down through your back, your legs braced against the gentle roll of the boat, and the gaff rises slowly, its forward end lifting first while the after end drags along the boom, the whole assembly creaking softly as the wood and rope and canvas find their working angles. The sound of the halyard running through the block is a low, groaning murmur, a voice of wood and hemp that speaks only when under load, and it is a sound you have heard so many times that it registers not as noise, but as a confirmation that everything is moving as it should. You pause halfway up to reset your grip, your breath coming in slow, even streams that condense into small clouds and drift away, and during this pause you look up at the gaff, now angled at 45 degrees against the grey sky, the sail hanging in loose folds that stir slightly as the upper canvas catches the first faint breath of wind. The wind is very light, a northerly drift that you can barely feel on your face, but up at the masthead it is strong enough to make the canvas whisper, a sound like someone turning the pages of a large book very slowly. Satisfied that the sail is filling cleanly and no lines are tangled, you resume hauling, each pull of your arms matched by a soft grunt of the halyard in the block, until the forward end of the gaff is snug against the masthead and the throat of the sail is set. You make the halyard fast to its cleat with a figure eight that never jams, then step back to look at what you have done, your hands automatically brushing the dust of old rope from your palms. The peak halyard comes next, the line that lifts the after end of the gaff and spreads the sail to its full height, and this is a lighter pull, more a matter of guiding than lifting, because the canvas is already catching the breeze and helping you. You haul the peak halyard gently, watching the gaff tilt upward until it sits almost horizontal against the sky. the sail stretched tight along its head, and the canvas now takes shape as a great curving wing of tan cloth that rises high above the deck, its surface rippling in slow, lazy undulations as the wind finds its way into every seam. You make the peak halyard fast beside the throat halyard, the two lines lying parallel on the cleat, and then you turn to the mainsheet, the line that controls the angle of the boom, and ease it out a few inches until the sail stops fluttering and settles into a smooth, quiet curve, its leech trailing off perfectly straight without a single flutter. The boat responds immediately, a subtle firming of the deck under your feet as the wind begins to push against the canvas, a push so gentle that it feels less like force and more like a suggestion, a quiet invitation to move. You walk aft to the tiller, your hand trailing along the cabin top as you go, and when you settle onto the low stool beside the rudder head, you feel the boat come alive around you, a collection of small sensations that together form a single, peaceful awareness of motion. The tiller under your hand is a shaped piece of oak, worn smooth by your grip and dark with oil from your skin, and it vibrates very softly, a hum that comes from the rudder cutting through the water at a walking pace. The wake spreads behind you in a long, shallow V that is barely visible on the glassy surface, more a shimmer than a disturbance, and at its widest point, where the waves should be white, there is only a slight puckering of the grey-green water, a dimple that heals itself within seconds. The bowsprit points steadily toward the open bay, its long tapered spar lifting and falling by no more than an inch with each slow breath of the sea, and beyond it the horizon remains hidden in the haze, a soft blur where water and cloud meet without a line. The wind, such as it is, comes from the north-northeast, a cool, steady drift that carries the smell of distant pine forests and the faint, clean scent of open water. It is a wind that cannot decide if it wants to blow, a wind that comes in soft pulses rather than a steady stream, and each pulse fills the sail with a gentle billow that pushes the boat forward a few feet before fading, leaving the canvas to hang slack for a heartbeat until the next pulse arrives. This rhythm is as slow as breathing, a rise and fall of pressure that you feel in the tiller as a slight increase and decrease of pull, and you respond to it without thinking, nudging the tiller a fraction this way or that to keep the boat on its course. Your movements so small that an observer would not see them. The boat is headed roughly southeast, toward the open water where the oyster rocks lie. But the exact heading does not matter. What matters is the quiet progress, the way the miles slide past without effort. The shoreline to starboard has retreated to a distant smudge, a low band of brown and grey that marks the edge of the eastern shore, and if you squint, you can make out the individual shapes of trees, bare oaks and tall pines that stand against the sky like strokes of a dry brush. The marsh grass in the foreground is a paler brown, a tan that edges into gold where the cloud light catches it, and it stretches in an unbroken carpet from the water's edge to the tree line, its surface rippling slightly as the same light wind that fills your sail brushes over it. There are no houses visible, no docks or boats or columns of smoke, only the wild shore doing what it has done for 1,000 years, and you feel a quiet kinship with that shore, a fellow traveller moving at the pace of the season. To port there is nothing but open water, a sheet of pale grey-green that stretches away until it dissolves into the haze, its surface so smooth that it reflects the sky perfectly, creating a double image of the overcast, a world above and a world below that meet at a horizon you cannot quite see. You let the tiller rest in the crook of your arm and reach down for the stone jug that sits in its wooden holder beside your stool. Its cork stopper dark with moisture and fitted with a loop of tarred twine for easy pulling. The jug is heavy, its clay surface cool and smooth, and when you work the cork free, it makes a soft pop that the open air swallows, the sound carrying no further than the rail. You drink slowly, the water slightly warm from being stored in the cabin, its taste carrying a faint mineral note from the limestone spring where you filled it, and you let the water sit in your mouth for a moment before swallowing, savouring the moisture in a morning that has been all dampness and no wetness. The cork goes back in with the same soft pop, and you return the jug to its holder, your eyes never leaving the horizon, your hand finding the tiller again without looking. Time passes, in the way it passes on the water, marked not by minutes, but by subtle changes in the light and the angle of the bowsprit against the clouds. The overcast sky has brightened slightly, the grey shifting from charcoal to pearl, though the sun itself remains a diffuse glow somewhere high above, a presence felt rather than seen. The light on the water has changed with it, the grey-green now tending toward a paler silver, and the reflection of the sail on the surface is a warm tan smear that glides along beside the boat, its edges soft and wavering. The bowsprit, which earlier pointed at a low cloud shaped like a long fish, now points at a gap in the overcast where the grey is thinner, a patch of brighter sky that you are steering toward without having decided to, drawn by the same instinct that keeps the boat in the channel. The angle of the bowsprit relative to the clouds is your compass, a slow liquid compass that changes so gradually you only notice it when you look up after a long while and see that everything has rearranged itself. The vibration of the tiller against your palm is a constant companion, a low, steady hum that speaks of the rudder moving through water at a speed just above drifting, and you let your mind settle into that hum, using it as a focus that keeps you present without requiring thought. The wake, when you glance astern, is a slightly darker stripe on the water, a path that the boat has drawn across the bay, and that is already beginning to fade, the surface closing over it like a door being gently shut. You watch the wake for a while, noting how far it stretches before it vanishes into the haze, a long, straight line that might be the only evidence the bay ever holds of your passage. Other boats would leave a similar wake, a temporary signature in water, but there are no other boats this morning, not a single sail or mast or plume of smoke anywhere on the visible sea. And so your wake is the only one, a solitary mark that the tide will erase within the hour. The sail overhead makes a soft, breathing sound as it fills and slackens, a rhythm that matches the pulse of the wind. And when you crane your neck to look up, you see the canvas stretch tight across its broad belly, the seams curving in clean, fair lines from throat to leech. The patches are visible from below as darker squares against the lighter tan, each one a small history of a rip and a mend, and you remember the winter evenings when you stitched them, the lamplight falling across the canvas straight over your knees, the steady push and pull of the needle through the heavy cloth. The sail is old but strong, its fibers still holding the twist that gives it life, and it will carry you through this day and many days after, a faithful servant that asks only to be handled with care. The gaff that holds it aloft is a spar of straight-grained fir, its surface varnished to a deep amber that glows dully even in the grey light, and the wooden hoops that connect the sail to the mast slide up and down with a faint, dry clicking as the boat rocks, a sound like pebbles being turned over in the hand. You shift your weight on the stool, feeling the familiar ache in your lower back that comes from sitting still too long, and you stretch one leg out, then the other, your boots scraping softly on the deck planks. The boat answers every movement with a slight adjustment of its trim, a tiny roll that rights itself immediately, and you are reminded that you and the boat are a single system, a partnership of wood and flesh that moves through the water as one creature. Your hand on the tiller has grown warm, the oak absorbing the heat of your palm and returning it, and when you lift your hand for a moment and place it back down, the wood feels almost alive, a smooth, warm surface that fits your grip exactly. The main sheet hangs in a loose curve from the boom to the block on the quarter, its line dark with age and slightly fuzzy, and it sways very gently as the boom lifts and falls with the swell, a pendulum motion that you can feel as a slight tug on the cleat, a tug so faint it might be your imagination. The bay remains flat, the swell so low and long that you cannot see it, only sense it as a slow tilting of the horizon, a gentle lifting and settling that repeats every few seconds. This swell is the memory of a wind that blew somewhere far away, maybe off the coast of New England or out in the open Atlantic, and it has traveled up the Chesapeake without breaking, a long, slow roller that passes under the boat and continues on its way to the head of the bay without ever showing itself as a wave. The boat rides over it without fuss, the bow lifting a few inches and then subsiding, the mast describing a tiny arc against the sky, and this motion is so regular that it becomes a background rhythm, a deep, slow pulse that you feel in your bones without noticing. The watercolor has settled into a steady silver green, the color of sage leaves after rain, and it stretches away on all sides with a uniformity that makes the world seem infinite. A circle of water and sky with the boat at its exact center. You let your gaze rest on the distant shore again, picking out details that emerge and fade as the light shifts. A stand of bare trees on a low rise, their branches a fine lacework of grey against the paler grey of the sky. A patch of marsh grass, slightly darker than the rest, perhaps a spot where the ground is wetter or the soil richer. A tiny opening in the tree line that might be a creek mouth, though it is too far away to be sure. None of these details demand attention, they simply exist, part of the quiet panorama that slides past at the speed of a slow walk, and you absorb them without analysis, letting them become part of the general peace of the morning. The air remains cool but not cold, the temperature steady at that point where the body forgets it exists, where you are neither warm nor chilled but simply comfortable, wrapped in your wool coat and the steady motion of the boat. After a long while you notice that the bowsprit has swung a few degrees, the gap in the clouds now off to starboard rather than dead ahead, and you nudge the tiller gently, bringing the boat back onto its heading with a slow, smooth correction that does not disturb the sail. The canvas rustles once, a soft, complacent sound, and then falls quiet again, the wind having shifted just enough to remain on the same quarter without requiring a trim. This is the kind of sailing that asks almost nothing of you. A slow drift across a placid sea under a gentle sky, and you settle deeper into it, your mind slipping into that calm, wordless state where the minutes pass without leaving a mark. The only measure of time is the angle of the bowsprit against the clouds, and even that is a measure so slow that it hardly counts, a clock whose hands move by the hour rather than the minute, and you are content to let it turn at its own pace, a quiet passenger on a boat that knows its way home. The air this morning is a thing you could almost hold in your hands, a substance with weight and texture, and a quiet voice that speaks not in words, but in the slow unfolding of scents across the deck. You stand by the mast with the tiller tucked under your arm, the boat drifting so gently that the wake has faded to a mere whisper of ripples, and you lift your face to the breeze, letting it tell you everything it knows about the bay and the shore and the season. The dominant note is salt, of course, but not the sharp, clean salt of the open ocean. This is a softer, earthier salt, a brackish tang that carries the memory of the marsh and the river mouths, a salt that has been tempered by fresh water flowing down from the hills of Pennsylvania and Maryland. Beneath the salt there is the smell of wet mud, the dark organic scent of the creek bottom exposed at low tide, a smell that rises from the shallows near the shore and drifts across the water in slow, invisible ribbons. It is the smell of 1,000 years of leaves falling into the water and sinking into the silt, of cordgrass roots and oyster shells and the slow decay of everything that lives, a smell that is not sweet or foul but simply rich, a deep, loamy fragrance that fills the back of your throat when you breathe in. Woven through the mud and the salt is a faint thread of something sharper, and a stringent note that comes from the marsh hay drying on the distant banks, the cured stalks of last summer's growth standing brittle and pale, releasing their dry, dusty perfume into the air as the breeze stirs them. The scent is so light that you lose it whenever the wind shifts a point or two, and then it returns, a ghost of itself, a reminder that the year is turning and the green things are sleeping. Alongside the marsh hay, coming and going in the same capricious way, there is the faint, clean smell of pine trees from a grove on the eastern shore that you cannot see but know is there, a stand of tall lobblies that you have used as a landmark in years past, their trunks straight and their crowns dark against the grey sky, breathing out their resinous breath that travels miles across the flat water without losing its sharpness. All these scents move together in the slow air, layering and separating, and your nose follows them the way your eyes follow the shore, without urgency, simply receiving what the morning offers. The coolness of the breeze across the backs of your hands is another part of the air's quiet inventory, a sensation so steady that you have stopped noticing it as cold and begun to notice it only as presence. The skin in your knuckles is slightly rough from years of salt water and rope work, the fine cracks filled with a permanent grayness that no amount of washing will remove, and the cool air finds those cracks and traces them with a touch lighter than a feather, a touch that does not sting but simply reminds you that your hands exist, that they are a part of you connected to the morning. When you turn your palms upward and let the breeze flow over them, There is a slight dampness there from handling the wet lines, and the evaporation adds a secondary coolness, a faint drawing away of heat that leaves the skin tight and tingling. You close your fingers slowly and open them again, feeling the air slip between them. A fluid, transparent thing that moves like water but weighs nothing. The temperature of the air is impossible to pin down, sitting in that narrow range where cool becomes neutral and the body forgets to register it as either comfort or discomfort. It is the temperature of a root cellar of a spring house in November, cool enough to make your breath show, but not cool enough to make you shiver. And the wool of your coat holds just enough of your body's warmth to create a small private climate inside the fabric, a pocket of still air that moves with you when you shift your weight. You can feel the boundary between this inner warmth and the outer coolness as a line running down your sides, a subtle gradient that you notice only when you stretch your arms and let the cool air slip up your sleeves for a moment. A brief intrusion that retreats as soon as you lower your hands. The scarf around your neck is a soft, worn length of knitted wool, its fibers packed with the day's dampness, and when you tuck your chin against it, you smell the faint, clean odor of lanolin and the sea salt dried into the yarn from 100 mornings just like this one. The light, now that the morning has fully established itself, has turned the water into a sheet of pewter with no glitter, a surface so uniform that it resembles hammered metal left out in the rain. The overcast is thinner than it was at dawn, the cloud layer stretched into a high, pale veil that diffuses the sunlight evenly, eliminating shadows and creating a world of soft, muted tones where nothing is bright and nothing is dark, but everything exists in a gentle middle range. The water reflects this diffuse light perfectly, acting as a mirror not for images but for luminosity, so that the bay seems to glow from within, a pale, silver-grey radiance that rises from below and meets the sky's radiance coming down. There is no horizon line that you can point to, only a gradual transition where the silver of the water grades into the paler silver of the sky. And if you stare at it for long enough, your eyes begin to lose the distinction, the two elements merging into a single, luminous field that has no depth and no surface, only color. Through patches of the bay where the water is particularly clear and the bottom is sandy rather than muddy, you can see the boat's shadow gliding along below. It is a dark, elongated shape that stretches from the hull to the seafloor, its edges soft and wavering, its form distorted by the gentle ripple of the surface into a shape that is more suggestion than outline. The shadow moves at the same slow speed as the boat, crossing over ripples in the sand that are themselves shadows of a different kind, the fossilized traces of currents that flowed across the bottom long ago. You watch the shadow for a while, noting how it darkens when it passes over a patch of dark sand and lightens over the pale, shell-strewn areas, a monochrome projector playing on the floor of the bay. The fish that might be swimming there are invisible from above, but you imagine them as small silver shapes that dart away when the shadow passes, though you cannot see them and have no need to. The image simply a quiet thought that drifts through your mind and away. You reach for the stone jug again, your hand finding it without your eyes leaving the water, and you work the cork free with a familiar twist that engages the muscles of your wrist and forearm in a single, smooth motion. The water inside is cooler now than it was an hour ago, the stone having shed its stored warmth to the air, and the first sip touches your lips with a chill that is almost crisp, a clean, mineral taste that washes the salt from your tongue and replaces it with the memory of the spring. You drink only a small amount, just enough to wet your mouth and throat, and then you lower the jug and wipe the mouthpiece with the sleeve of your coat. A habitual gesture that you perform without thinking, the rough wool absorbing the few drops of water that cling to the glazed rim. The cork goes back in with a soft, satisfying pressure, and you return the jug to its holder, the whole sequence taking no more than 20 seconds and leaving behind only a faint, clean taste on your tongue and a slight coolness in your stomach. The boat continues its slow drift along the edge of the shoal, the water depth changing from 6 fathoms to 4 and then back to 5 as the bottom rises and falls in gentle undulations that you read through the color of the surface. Where the bottom is deeper, the water is a cooler gray with a hint of green, and where it shoals the color warms toward a sandy brown, the transition marked by a soft line that curves across your path like a lazy serpent. You nudge the tiller now and then to keep the boat on the deeper side of this line, Not because the shoal is dangerous. The boat draws only 3 feet, and the shoal has a fathom of water over it at low tide, but because the deeper water is where the boat seems to want to go, its keel finding the old channel by some instinct of wood and lead that you trust without question. The breeze, what little there is of it, has backed slightly toward the north, cooling the air by a degree or two and bringing with it a new scent. A trace of wood smoke from a distant farmhouse on the eastern shore, a smell so faint that you might be imagining it, except that it persists when you turn your head into the wind. It is the smell of oak or hickory burning in a cook stove, a dry, clean smoke that rises from a chimney you cannot see and drifts across the miles of water, thinning as it comes, but never quite disappearing, a signal from a human presence so far away that it is only a scent, a ghost of a neighbor living his own quiet morning. The air also carries, very occasionally, a sound that is not quite a sound, a vibration so low that it registers in your chest rather than your ears. This is the distant throb of a steamer's engine somewhere far down the bay, perhaps a packet boat running between Baltimore and Norfolk, its paddle wheels churning the water into foam that you will never see, its whistle silent for now. The sound fades in and out, traveling through the water as much as through the air, and when it fades you are left with a silence that seems deeper than before, a silence made of the absence of sound rather than the presence of quiet. Into this silence the small noises of the boat return, the creak of the gaff against the mast, the soft flap of the leech as the sail breathes, the gentle slap of a stray line against the deck, each noise separate and distinct, each one a small familiar voice in the larger stillness. The taste of the air on your lips is a complex thing, a mixture of the salt you have already catalogued and the faint sweetness of the distant wood smoke, and something else, something metallic and clean, that might be the taste of the light itself, though you know light has no taste. It is the taste of a November morning on the Chesapeake, a taste you have known since childhood and have never needed to describe, a taste that means home and stillness and the slow passage of time. When you lick your lips, the taste intensifies for a moment, the salt and the sweetness and the metallic cleanness all sharpening, and then it fades back to its normal level, a background note that you are only aware of when you pay attention. You pay attention now, holding the taste in your mouth the way you might hold a sip of wine, letting it linger on your tongue and the roof of your mouth before you swallow, and it becomes only a memory. The shoal falls away to starboard, and the water deepens, the bottom disappearing from view as the color shifts back to the cool, opaque grey-green of the channel. And with the deeper water comes a subtle change in the boat's motion, a longer, slower roll that speaks of the open bay rather than the sheltered creek. The tiller feels different in your hand now, the vibration softer, more diffuse, as if the rudder is moving through a larger volume of water that cushions its passage, and you adjust your grip slightly, your fingers finding a new position on the worn oak that accommodates this changed sensation. The horizon, which has been a seamless blend of silver and grey all morning, now shows a faint line, a slightly darker band where the water ends and the sky begins, and you watch this line for a while, noting how it thickens and thins as the light changes, a slow, subtle dance that marks the boundary between the elements. The air on the open bay is different from the air in the creek, more mobile, less burdened with the smells of the land, and it moves across the water in long, sweeping currents that you can see as faint cat's paws on the surface, patches of rippled water that travel across the glassy calm without disturbing it. These cat's paws approach the boat, darken the water for a moment as they pass under the hull, and then continue on their way toward the western shore, their progress marked by a subtle change in the light, a momentary roughening of the smooth pewter surface. When a catspaw passes over the boat, you feel it as a slight increase in the wind, a cool breath that fills the sail with a soft, rounding curve and then releases it, the canvas sagging back to its resting shape with a quiet sigh. The rhythm of these puffs is irregular, spaced anywhere from 10 seconds to a minute apart, and each one is a small event that registers and then passes, leaving no trace. You sit on the stool by the tiller and let the morning wash over you, your mind as still as the water, your senses open to the slow, peaceful inventory of the air. The brackish tang ebbs and flows, the marsh scent rises and falls, the wood smoke appears and vanishes, and through it all, the steady coolness wraps around you like a second coat, a companionable presence that asks nothing and gives everything. You taste the salt on your lips, feel the sunless light on your face, and watch the boat's shadow glide over patches of sandy bottom. The whole morning, a single flowing moment that stretches from the misty dawn to this quiet, open water noon, without a seam. There is no urgency, no need to be anywhere else or do anything else. Only the boat and the bay and the air that tastes of autumn and salt, and the distant memory of a fire burning in a stove you will never see. The lead line rests in its own coil on the starboard side deck, a neat spiral of rope that you laid down weeks ago and have not disturbed since, though the sea has not touched it with any disorder. The coil is 3 feet across, built of a long length of 3-strand manila that has been dressed with linseed oil until it gleams a dull brown, and its fibers are stiff yet supple, holding the shape of the coil without any tendency to kink. At the center of the coil sits the lead weight, a tapered cylinder of cast lead about 14 inches long and weighing 7 pounds, its lower end hollowed out into a cup that you have filled with tallow, a pale, greasy substance that smells faintly of rendered beef fat and is firm enough to hold its shape, yet soft enough to pick up any material it touches on the bottom. The lead itself is dark grey, mottled with a white patina of oxidation, and its surface is dented and scratched from countless encounters with oyster shell and hard sand, each mark a tiny record of a sounding made long ago. You kneel beside the coil, the deck planks cool through the knees of your trousers, and you lift the weight carefully, feeling its dense, compact heaviness settle into your palm, a heaviness that seems out of proportion to its size because lead has a way of concentrating mass into a small space, making the hand think it holds something larger than it does. With the weight in your left hand you begin to flake out the line with your right, pulling loops free from the coil and laying them on the deck in a loose, overlapping pattern that will run cleanly when the weight is thrown. The line passes through your fingers with a dry, whispering sound, and as it moves you feel the slight texture of the strands, the way the twist of the rope creates a spiral ridge that bumps gently against your skin. The line is marked at regular intervals with knots and bits of cloth and leather, a code that tells the depth without looking, a single knot at 1 fathom, 2 knots at 2 fathoms, a strip of white canvas at 3, a strip of red wool at 5, a leather thong with 2 tails at 7, and so on, up to 20 fathoms, though you rarely use more than the first 10. You have memorized these marks long ago, and your fingers can read them in the dark, but you still glance down as you pull the line out, confirming that the white canvas marker at 3 fathoms is intact, that the red wool at 5 is not rotted or frayed. Everything is as it should be, the line strong and the markers secure, the lead weight heavy and cool, the tallow filling its cup with a smooth white surface that is ready to receive the bottom. When enough line is flaked out on the deck you rise to your feet, the weight dangling from your hand, and you step to the starboard rail just forward of the shrouds, a spot where the deck is clear and the water is deep enough for a proper sounding. The rail here is worn smooth from years of your hand resting on it, and you place your left palm on the wood, feeling the cool, familiar texture, while your right hand holds the lead line just above the weight, the line running loosely through your fingers. The bay around you is calm, the surface a smooth grey-green with only the faintest texture of ripples, and the boat drifts slowly sideways, pushed by the last of the flood tide, its motion so gentle that it will not interfere with the sounding. You stand still for a moment, letting the boat settle into its drift, letting your own body find its balance on the gently moving deck, and then you begin to swing the lead. The motion starts in your shoulder, a slow pendulum swing that sends the weight forward and back, each arc a little higher than the last, as you feed more line into the swing. The weight cuts through the air with a faint, deep whoosh that is more felt than heard, a vibration in the bones of your wrist, and the line pays out from the coil on the deck in smooth, steady lengths, running through your guiding hand without a snag. You count the swings without counting them, your body knowing from long practice exactly when the momentum is right, and then on the forward upswing you release the weight, letting it fly out and away from the boat in a low, flat trajectory that carries it perhaps 20 feet ahead before it strikes the water. The splash is a soft, heavy plop, not loud, but deep, a sound that seems to come from inside the water rather than from the surface, and then the weight is sinking, pulling the line after it in a steady, hissing stream that runs through your relaxed fingers with the speed you can control by closing your hands slightly. You feel the line passing over the rail, a smooth, rapid friction that produces a low humming sound, a note that starts high and drops in pitch as the weight descends, the tone flattening out as more line becomes submerged and the drag of the water slows the fall. The line continues to run out, the markers flicking past your fingers one by one, the single knot at 1 fathom, the double knot at 2, the white canvas at 3. You feel each marker as a slight bump, a change in texture that your fingers register automatically, and at the 3-fathom mark you close your hand a little more, adding just enough friction to slow the descent without stopping it. The weight is still falling, the line still humming, and then the red wool marker at 5 fathoms passes through your hand, its soft, fuzzy texture, a brief warmth against your fingertips, and you prepare for the bottom. At 5.5 fathoms, the line suddenly goes slack, a distinct, unmistakable softening of the pull that travels up from the lead, through the rope and into your hand, telling you that the weight has settled into the mud. You let the line rest for a moment, giving the lead time to sink into the bottom and the tallow time to pick up its sample, and then you begin to haul it back. The hauling is a steady, rhythmic motion, hand over hand, your left hand pulling a length of line while your right hand gathers it and lays it on the deck in a new coil that will be ready for the next sounding. The line comes up wet and cool, the water dripping from it in small silvery drops that darken the deck planks, and as it rises you feel the weight of the lead pulling against you, a dead weight that is heavier than it was going down because now it is full of the bay, dragging through the water with a resistance that makes the muscles of your shoulders and back work in a slow, pleasant rhythm. The line passes through your hands with a steady, musical slapping sound as each coil comes aboard, and you keep the pace even, neither hurrying nor dawdling, because the sounding is not a race, but a conversation, a slow exchange of information between the deck and the bottom. The markers appear again in reverse order, the red wool first, then the white canvas, then the double knot, and the single knot, each one a confirmation that the depth is what you thought it was, that the bottom lies where you remember it. When the lead breaks the surface, the water runs off it in thin, glistening sheets, and you swing it aboard with a gentle, practiced motion, catching the weight in your left hand while your right hand guides the line into the growing coil on the deck. You crouch down with the lead in your palm, its cold, wet weight settling against your skin, and you turn it over to examine the tallow cup. The tallow has done its work, its smooth surface now dimpled and smeared and embedded with the evidence of the bottom, a thick, grey mud that smells of deep, still water and ancient silt, mixed with a few tiny fragments of crushed shell, pale white and sharp-edged, the remnants of oysters that died long ago and were ground down by the patient work of the currents. You poke at the sample with your fingertip, feeling the grit of the shell fragments, the slick, clay-like texture of the mud, and you read the bottom from this small offering, the way a farmer reads the soil from a handful of earth. The mud is soft and deep, the kind of bottom that holds oysters well, and the shell fragments are a good sign, evidence that the oyster rock is nearby or directly under the keel. The depth, you note without speaking, is 6 fathoms, a comfortable 36 feet, deep enough to keep the boat safe and shallow enough for the dredge to work effectively when the time comes. You clean the tonneau cup with your thumb, scraping out the mud and shell fragments and flicking them over the side, where they fall into the water and descend in a slow, cloudy plume that fades from sight within seconds. Then you dip your thumb in the tallow pot that sits in a wooden box near the mast, a small earthenware jar filled with the same greasy, pale substance, and you press a fresh dab of tallow into the cup, smoothing it level with the surface of the lead, preparing it for the next sounding. The lead weight, now clean and replenished, goes back into the center of the new coil you have built on the deck, and you stand up slowly, feeling the slight stretch in your back, the pleasant tiredness in your arms from the hauling. The coil on the deck is as neat as the one you started with, a tight spiral of wet, glistening line with the lead weight nested at its heart, ready to be used again without any tangles or snarls, because you have been doing this for so long that neatness is not an effort but a habit, a gift you give to your future self. You wait for a time, standing by the rail with your hand resting on the smooth wood, watching the bay and letting the boat drift a little further along the edge of the oyster rock. The tide has slackened, the current so weak that the boat barely moves, and the surface of the water is a perfect mirror now, reflecting the pale grey sky with such fidelity that you can see the faint texture of the clouds in it, the soft woolly shapes drifting slowly across the inverted world below. After a while you decide to sound again, not because you need to, but because the repetition is soothing, a way of marking the morning that requires no thought, but yields a quiet satisfaction. You move to the coil, lift the lead, and begin to flake out the line once more, your hands moving through the same motions with the same unhurried pace, the line whispering across the deck, the weight swinging in a slow, steady arc, the splash soft and deep as the lead strikes the water and begins its descent. The second sounding follows the same rhythm as the first, the line running out through your fingers with that low humming note, the markers bumping against your palm in their familiar sequence. And when the line goes slack, you feel again that distinct, unmistakable softening, that sudden release of tension that says the lead has found the bottom. The depth is the same, 6 fathoms, give or take a few inches that the tide accounts for, and when you haul the lead back and examine the tallow, the sample is almost identical. Grey mud, a scattering of crushed shell, the faint, clean smell of the deep bottom. You clean the tallow, refresh it, coil the line, and stand again by the rail, looking out at the water that has not changed in any visible way. The same grey-green expanse stretching to the same soft horizon, the same quiet air moving across the same calm bay. The repetition of the sounding has not been a quest for new information, but a confirmation of what you already knew. A way of touching the bottom without seeing it, of maintaining a connection with the hidden world below that is as real to you as the deck under your feet. After another interval, perhaps 10 minutes, perhaps 20, you decide to sound once more, a third and final time, before you move on to some other quiet task. This is the rhythm of the morning. A sounding, a pause, a sounding, a pause, the intervals filled with nothing but the slow drift of the boat and the soft breathing of the wind. The third sounding is identical to the first two in every particular. The same swing of the lead, the same hissing descent, the same soft plop as the weight strikes the water, the same hum of the line running over the rail, the same slackening that signals the bottom, the same depth of 6 fathoms, the same grey mud and shell fragments in the tallow cup. You clean the lead one last time, coil the line with the same careful hands, and set the coil back in its place on the starboard deck, the weight nested at the center, the line ready for the next time you need it, whenever that may be. The deck is as uncluttered as it was when you began. No stray lines or tangled coils to trip over, every piece of gear in its proper place, and you feel a quiet, wordless contentment in this order. A sense that the boat is a small, self-contained world where everything has a purpose and nothing is wasted. You walk aft to the tiller, your boots making their familiar soft thud on the deck, and you settle onto the stool, your hand finding the smooth oak of the tiller and your eyes finding the horizon. The bay is still calm, the sky still overcast, the air still cool and still, and the lead line rests in its coil, its work done for now. The soundings you have taken are not written down anywhere except in your memory, but they do not need to be written down because the bottom is a constant, a steady, reliable thing that does not change from month to month or year to year. The oyster rock is where it has always been, its depth a known quantity, its mud a familiar texture, its shell fragments a sign of the life that grows below, and you carry this knowledge with you as you carry the feel of the tiller in your hand, a quiet certainty that asks no questions and demands no answers. The morning continues, the boat drifts, and the lead line waits, its 3 soundings a small, perfect cycle that has added nothing new to the world, but has confirmed everything that matters. The sun remains hidden behind the overcast, yet the light has been changing all morning in ways too subtle to name. A slow brightening that is not brightness, but a thinning of the grey, as if the clouds are being drawn upward and stretched wider by some gentle, invisible hand. You sit on the low stool beside the mast, your back resting against the smooth, varnished wood, and you let your eyes wander across the water without fixing on anything, your gaze as loose and unfocused as the light itself. The boat drifts on the slack tide, its motion so slight that you feel it not as movement, but as a kind of stillness that is somehow different from the stillness of land, a live, breathing stillness that has a pulse. Around you the bay spreads out in all directions, a circle of water that meets a circle of sky. And in this diffuse, shadowless illumination the world looks flat, two-dimensional, like a painting done in washes of grey and green and brown. You have seen this light 1,000 times. This particular November light that comes when the sun is high enough to bleach the clouds but not strong enough to burn through them, and you know that it marks the slow passage of the morning toward noon, a passage that you measure not with a clock but with the color of the water and the angle of the shadows that are not there. The watercolor is your clock, a liquid timepiece that shifts through a spectrum of muted tones as the day advances, and you read it the way a landsman reads the hands on a church tower. At dawn the water was black, then a deep, colorless grey, then a green so dark it was almost black again. And now, as the hidden sun climbs toward its low November zenith, the color has settled into a pale, milky green-brown, the shade of old glass bottles that have been tumbled in the sea, the shade of the back of a turtle, basking on a mudbank. This color is not uniform. It changes in long, sweeping bands as the bottom rises and falls, deeper and cooler over the channels, warmer and muddier over the shoals, and you can trace the shape of the submerged world by following these color bands with your eyes. Where the water is palest and brownest, the bottom is closest, a sandbar or a mudflat that you could wade across at low tide, and where it darkens to a deeper green, the bottom falls away into the ancient channels that the rivers carved long ago when the sea was lower and the Chesapeake was a valley rather than a bay. You know these channels without sounding them, their courses written on the surface in a language of color that you learned to read as a boy, a language that has no alphabet but speaks clearly nonetheless. The temperature has not changed since dawn, holding steady at that point just above freezing where the air feels cool without biting, and your breath still rises in slow white plumes that drift away from your face and dissolve into the grey. You watch these plumes as they appear and vanish, each one a small temporary ghost that lives for only a second, and you fall into a rhythm of breathing that is slower than normal, a deep, steady rhythm that matches the slow roll of the boat. Your body has settled into the morning, your muscles relaxed, your joints loose, your mind moving at the same unhurried pace as the tide. The wool coat wraps around you with a familiar weight, its fibers holding the warmth of your body and the dampness of the air in equal measure, and the scarf at your neck is a soft, comforting presence that you touch occasionally with your chin, feeling the yarn slide against your skin. You are not warm, but you are not cold either. You are in a state of balance with the air, a thermal equilibrium that requires no adjustment, and this balance is part of the quiet pleasure of the morning, a comfort so complete that you forget it exists until you shift your position and feel it reassert itself. The tide has turned while you sat there, a fact you know not from any visible sign, but from a subtle change in the boat's orientation. A slow rotation that has brought the bow around to point toward the creek mouth rather than the open bay. The flood tide is now the ebb tide, the water beginning its long, slow surge back toward the Atlantic, and the boat has answered this change by swinging on its anchorless drift, aligning itself with the new current the way a weather vane aligns itself with the wind. The surface of the water shows no ripple or current line to mark the turn, only a tiny drift of foam that has gathered along the waterline, a thin, white scum of bubbles and marsh dust that inches slowly aft as the ebb begins to pull. You watch this foam line for a while, noting how it clings to the hull, how it stretches and breaks into small white islands that drift away and dissolve, and you see in its slow movement the first visible evidence of the tide's change, a confirmation of what the boat's swing has already told you. A small notebook and a stub of pencil rest in the pocket of your coat, and after a while you reach for them with the slow, automatic motion of a man who performs this action every day without thinking about it. The notebook is a simple thing of brown paper covers and stitched binding, its pages yellowed and crinkled from exposure to damp air, and the pencil is a carpenter's pencil, flat-sided and short, its point sharpened with a knife rather than a sharpener. You open the notebook across your knee, finding the current page by the feel of the paper, which is rougher where it has been written on and smoother where it is blank, and you smooth the page flat with the heel of your hand, the paper cool and slightly damp under your palm. The log entries from previous days run down the page in your own cramped handwriting, each one a single line that records the date, the weather, the location, and the catch. Though the catch column has been empty for several days now, the word none, repeating down the page in a neat, unapologetic column that does not trouble you in the least. You write the date at the start of a new line, using the pencil with the careful, deliberate strokes of a man who learned to write as an adult and still forms each letter individually. The date is November 12th, 1885, and you write it out fully, the numbers small and neat, the pencil leaving a faint, silvery trail on the rough paper. After the date you pause, looking up at the sky, reading the overcast for any sign of change, before you commit the weather to the page. The sky is as it has been all morning, a uniform grey with no breaks or variations, and you write calm, overcast, light northerly air, in a line that slants slightly upward, the letters growing smaller as they approach the edge of the page. The depth you record is 6 fms without hesitation, the number drawn from the soundings you took earlier and still held fresh in your memory, and then you pause at the catch column, the pencil hovering, before writing "No dredging today" in a hand that is slightly looser, slightly more relaxed, as if the admission of idleness requires less formality than the record of work. You read the entry over once, your lips moving slightly, and then you close the notebook and return it to your pocket along with the pencil. The whole ritual having taken perhaps 2 minutes. A small act of record-keeping that anchors the day in time, even though the day itself seems to float free of time. The marsh islands that mark the edge of the creek mouth have been slowly coming abeam as the boat drifts on the ebb, their low brown shapes growing larger, by degrees so small that you only notice the change when you look up after a long interval and see that they have rearranged themselves. These islands are not true islands but raised hummocks of marsh grass and mud, their edges fringed with a tangle of cordgrass that has dried to a pale, tawny gold, the colour of a lion's mane, the colour of a wheat stubble after harvest. The grass shifts in the light wind, a slow, continuous rustling that you can hear as a faint, dry whisper across the water, a sound like paper being crumpled very far away, and individual stalks bow and straighten in a rhythm that has no pattern, each one moving to its own private breeze. Beyond the grass, the islands rise to a low crest, where a few stunted pines grow, their trunks gnarled and twisted by the salt wind, their needles a dark, somber green that is the deepest color in this pale landscape. You've passed these islands hundreds of times, and they are as familiar to you as the furniture in your own house. Yet they never look exactly the same, the light and the tide and the season always combining to create a slightly different version of the same scene, a variation on a theme that you never tire of observing. The boat drifts past the first of the marsh islands, and as it does the water shallows slightly, the color shifting from the deep green-brown of the channel to a paler, sandier brown, and you can see the bottom now, a smooth, muddy plain dotted with the dark humps of oyster clumps and the pale, scattered shells of dead oysters that the gulls have dropped from a height. The clumps are living oysters, their shells covered with a fine grey silt that shifts in the current, revealing the sharp layered edges of new growth, and they sit in clusters of 5 or 6 or a dozen, their shapes irregular and lumpy, like small dark fists pushing up through the mud. You can see them clearly through the clear, shallow water, and you count them without meaning to, your eyes moving from one clump to the next, noting the size and spacing, filing the information away for some future day, when you might return to this spot with the dredge. For now the oysters are safe, undisturbed, living their slow, silent lives on the bottom, while you drift overhead, a passing shadow that does not touch them. You shift on the stool, crossing one ankle over the other, and you let your hands rest loosely in your lap, the fingers of your right hand curling lightly around the fingers of your left. The posture is one of complete rest, a stillness that goes beyond the physical into the mental, a quietness of thought that is not emptiness, but a kind of peaceful, undirected awareness. You are aware of the boat under you, the slight, rhythmic pressure of the deck against the soles of your boots. You are aware of the air around you, the cool, steady brush of it against your cheeks. You are aware of the light, the soft, diffuse grey that wraps the world in a seamless blanket. And you are aware of the water, the slow breathing motion that rocks the boat in a cradle rhythm, the color that shifts and changes as the bottom rises and falls. All these awarenesses exist at once, overlapping and blending, and none of them demands your attention or disturbs the peace that has settled over the morning like a layer of mist. You sit in the center of this peace, a still point in a slowly turning world, and you let the minutes pass without counting them. Let the boat drift without steering it. Let the marsh islands slide past without watching them. Your mind as calm and as open as the bay itself. After a long while you become aware that the light has changed again, another subtle shift that is more a feeling than a sight, a slight warming of the grey that suggests the hidden sun has reached its highest point and is now beginning its slow descent toward the western shore. The colour of the water has shifted with the light, the pale green-brown, now touched with a faint silvery sheen, a metallic glint that appears and disappears as the surface ripples, and the clouds overhead have thinned just enough to show a brighter patch near the centre of the sky, a diffuse glow that might be the sun trying to break through, or might be simply a thinner layer of vapour. You lift your face to this glow and feel no warmth from it, only a slight brightening of the light on your closed eyelids, a reddish-grey luminosity that filters through your skin and reminds you that the sun still exists, still burns, still crosses the sky on its ancient, unvarying path. You open your eyes and lower your gaze, and the world looks the same as it did before, grey and green and brown and calm, the moment of change having passed without leaving a trace except the knowledge that it happened, that the morning is now the afternoon, that the day is half over and the night is half yet to come. The ebb tide continues to pull the boat toward the mouth of the creek, and you let it pull, content to drift without sail or oar, a passenger on a vessel that knows its way home. The marsh islands have fallen behind now, their brown shapes receding into the haze, and ahead of you the creek mouth opens into the wide, flat expanse of the bay, a sheet of silver-grey water that stretches to a horizon lost in the mist. Somewhere out there, beyond the haze, the oyster rocks wait on the bottom, their shells crusted with mud and barnacles, their flesh cool and briny and still. They will be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, and you will return to them when the time is right, when the wind is fair and the tide is slack, and the morning is as calm as this one. For now you simply sit and drift and watch the watercolour change with the slow, steady rhythm of a clock that has no hands. A clock that measures time by the turning of the tide and the shifting of the light and the quiet, patient breathing of the bay. The boat is a small world, and like any world it holds its own order, a quiet arrangement of things that you have placed and replaced so many times that your hands know where everything belongs without your eyes having to look. This morning the bay is a mill pond and the wind is a whisper, and there is no work to be done, no dredge to haul, no sail to trim, no heading to hold, and so you find yourself drawn into the gentle, unhurried ritual of looking after the gear. It is not a task that needs doing, not a chore that presses on you with any urgency, but simply a habit, a way of passing the calm hours that leaves the boat a little better than you found it, a little more shipshape in ways that only you will ever notice. You rise from the stool by the mast, your knees popping softly as you straighten, and you stand for a moment with one hand on the smooth wood, looking around the deck with the slow, assessing gaze of a man who has spent a lifetime fitting small pieces into a small space. Everything is already in its place, the lines coiled, the dredge stowed, the culling board tucked on edge against the starboard coaming, yet there is always something that can be adjusted, a lashing that can be tightened by a quarter turn, a block that can be wiped clean of the salt crust that has begun to form on its iron strap, a length of line that can be recoiled so that it lies just a little flatter against the deck. You decide to begin with the iron tongs. The tongs rest in wooden chocks on the port side deck, just forward of the cabin trunk, their long handles lying parallel to the rail, their iron heads nested together like the closed beaks of some long, slender bird. They are not the tongs you use every day. Those are ashore, being mended, but a spare set, older and heavier, their shafts of straight-grained ash darkened with age and polished to a dull gleam by the grip of your hands over many seasons. You stoop and lift one of the shafts, feeling the weight of the iron head pull against your arm, a weight that is balanced somewhat by the length of the handle, but still substantial, a weight that speaks of serious work in deep water. The ash is smooth under your palm, its surface sealed by years of linseed oil and salt water and the natural oils of your skin into a finish that is harder and finer than any varnish, a finish that seems to glow faintly even in the grey light. You run your hand along the length of the shaft, checking for splinters or cracks, finding none. the wood as sound as it was, the day it was cut from a tree on the eastern shore. Where the shaft meets the iron head, there is a metal ferrule, a band of forged iron that holds the wood and the metal together with 4 heavy rivets, and you examine these rivets one by one, your thumbnail probing the edges where rust might creep in. But they are tight and clean, greased recently with a dab of tallow that has dried to a pale, waxy film. The iron heads of the tongs are a complex assembly of curved bars and pivoting joints, a basket of teeth that opens and closes like a mouth, designed to bite into the bottom and scoop up the oysters without crushing them. The teeth are worn blunt from years of biting into shell and rock, their points rounded into smooth, gentle curves that gleam with the same polished grey as the lead weight of the sounding line, and you trace your finger over several of them, feeling the cool, hard metal, the slight pitting where the iron has rusted and been cleaned and rusted again. The pivot pin at the center of the head is a thick iron bolt that moves with a smooth, heavy action, greased with the same tallow as the ferrules, and you open and close the tongs once, watching the jaws separate and come together with a soft, deep clank, a sound that is the voice of the tool itself, a low, musical note that resonates in the iron and then fades. You lift the tongs from their chocks and turn them over, examining the back side, the side that drags along the bottom, and you find a small wisp of eelgrass caught in the teeth, dried to a brown papery thread that crumbles when you pull it free. The grass falls to the deck, and you brush it over the side with the edge of your hand, watching it drift on the surface for a moment before the weight of the water soaks it and it sinks, a tiny, vertical green-brown line disappearing into the grey-green depths. The tongs go back into their chocks with the same care with which you lifted them, the shafts aligned perfectly parallel, the heads nested together just so, and you press down gently on the handles to make sure the chocks are still holding them firmly against the deck. They are. The wood of the chocks as solid as the day you fitted them, the bronze screws that hold them to the deck, planks bright and tight, and you nod once, a tiny, private acknowledgement that the tongs are ready for whenever they are needed, that this small corner of the boat is in order. From the tongs you move aft to where the hand dredge is lashed to the cabin bulkhead. A smaller version of the main dredge, its iron frame about 2 feet across, and its mesh bag finer, designed for working in very shallow water where the big dredge would be too heavy to handle. The hand dredge is secured with 2 lengths of tarred marline that you tied months ago, and you check each knot now, pulling on the tails to make sure they have not worked loose, running your thumb over the hitches to confirm that the tar is still holding the fibers tight. The knots are solid, the marline slightly stiff with dried salt but still strong, and you leave them as they are, satisfied. The mesh bag of the hand dredge is folded neatly under the frame, its twine a darker brown than the bag of the main dredge because it spends more time in the water and less time in the sun, and you smell the familiar rich scent of old mud and crushed oyster as you lean close, a scent that rises from the folded bag like a memory of all the shallow creeks and sandbars where you have used it. A tiny spider has built a web between the frame and the bulkhead, a fragile white construction no larger than a silver dollar, its strands beaded with the morning's dampness, and you leave it there, because the spider is a fisherman too, in its own small way, and the boat has room enough for both of you. The culling board is next, a simple plank of white oak 2 feet wide and 4 feet long, its surface scarred with 1,000 tiny cuts from the edges of oyster shells, its edges rounded and smooth from handling. It is stowed on edge against the starboard coaming, held in place by 2 wooden brackets that you shaped yourself with a draw knife on a winter afternoon when the boat was hauled out and the wind was too high for oystering. You lift the board from its brackets and lay it flat across 2 sawhorses that you bring out from the cabin, the horses' wooden legs clacking softly as they unfold, their joints held by bronze pins that you check with a quick automatic glance. The board settles into place with a solid, level thump, and you stand before it with your hands resting on its surface, feeling the familiar topography of cuts and grooves. The slight hollow near the center where you do most of your culling, a hollow that your hands have worn into the hardwood over years of sorting oysters by size and weight. The board is clean, you scrubbed it down after the last time you used it, scrubbing with a stiff brush and bay water until the wood was pale and the shell fragments were gone, but you run your palm over it anyway, feeling for any grit or splinters that might have appeared, finding only the smooth, cool surface of well-cared-for white oak. The copper culling ring hangs from a loop of leather on your belt, a simple circle of heavy copper wire about 3 inches across, its interior exactly the legal minimum size for a market oyster. You take it from your belt and hold it up, turning it in the grey light, noting the greenish patina that has formed on the copper where your fingers do not touch it, a soft blue-green bloom that is the metal's slow response to the salt air. The ring is perfectly round, its ends joined with a neatly brazed joint that has never cracked, and you run your finger around the inner edge, feeling the slight roughness where the patina has built up. You could polish it, you suppose, but the patina is a record of all the mornings you have stood at this board culling oysters, and you leave it as it is, returning the ring to its loop on your belt with a gentle pat. Moving about the deck with no urgency, you find yourself bending to check the caulking of the deck seams, a task that is never done and never needed, a perpetual slow-motion inspection that is more meditation than maintenance. The deck planks are long, straight-grained lengths of heart pine, their surfaces worn to a soft, silvery grey by weather and walking. And between them, the seams are packed with a mixture of oakum and pitch, a black, tar-like substance that keeps the water out. In the cool of the morning, the pitch is hard and slightly brittle, and you run your thumb along the nearest seam, pressing down to test the seal, finding it firm and unbroken. A few inches further along, there is a small crack in the pitch, a hairline fissure that might open in a heavy sea, but is nothing to worry about on a morning as calm as this, and you make a mental note to re-pitch it someday, when the weather is warmer and the pitch flows more easily. For now you simply press it with your thumb, the warmth of your skin softening the pitch just enough to close the crack, a temporary repair that will hold until the next time you think to look at it. The wooden pins that hold the deck planks to the beams below are called tree nails, pronounced trunnels, and you check a few of them as you move along the deck, tapping each one with the knuckle of your index finger, listening to the sound they make. A sound, tight tree nail produces a sharp, solid note, a little tick like a stone tapping glass, while a loose one gives a duller, softer thud, and you listen carefully to each as you go, hearing only the bright, hard tick of wood that is still doing its job. The tree nails are made of black locust, a wood so hard and rot-resistant that it outlasts the pine planking around it, and their tops are slightly proud of the deck, worn into smooth, rounded domes that catch the light with a faint golden sheen, one of the few warm colors in this world of gray and green and brown. You count them as you tap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the count meaningless, just a rhythm to accompany the tapping, and when you have tapped a dozen, you stop, satisfied that the deck is as sound as it was when you launched the boat. The blocks that guide the various lines, the halyard blocks at the masthead that you cannot reach, the sheet blocks on the rail that you can. Each one is a small assembly of wood and iron and bronze that needs no attention but receives it anyway. You move from block to block, turning the heavy lignum vitae sheaves with your thumb, feeling the smooth, greased rotation, the slight resistance of the bronze bushing, the way the sheave spins and then slows and then stops with a soft, woody click against the inside of the shell. The ropes that run through these blocks have left their mark on the wood, polished grooves that catch the light and gleam like varnish, and you trace these grooves with your finger, feeling the smooth, hard surface, the way the wood has been compressed by years of pressure into something denser and finer than the original grain. One of the blocks on the port rail has a dry sheave. It spins slightly stiffer than the others, and you take a small tin of grease from the locker under the deck and work a dab into the bushing with the tip of your finger, turning the sheave back and forth until the motion smooths out and the block moves as silently as all the others. The tin goes back into the locker, your finger wiped clean on a rag that you keep in your pocket, a scrap of old flannel that is stiff with dried grease and salt, but still soft enough to do its job. The lazarette under the afterdeck is a small dark space where you keep the spare lines and the extra blocks, and the coils of marline and the grease tin, and a dozen other small items that you do not need every day, but want to have aboard. You lift the hatch cover, a square of pine with a rope handle, and you peer inside without pulling anything out, letting your eyes adjust to the dimness, taking an inventory that is more a reassurance than a count. The spare mainsheet is there, coiled in a tight, flat spidet, a Messala Fierro strand hemp that you bought in Baltimore 2 years ago, and have not needed yet. The blocks are stacked in a pyramid on the port side of the compartment, their iron straps protected from rust by a thin coating of oil that gleams faintly. The fid and the marlin spike lie crossed in their leather sheath, wrapped in their toil of cloth. All boating, all poet, that pondled cadet of Vitamerk. You lower the hatch cover back into place with a soft, solid thump and press it down with your palm, feeling the deck seal itself against the coaming. A tight, squeak-free fit that tells you the gasket is still good. When you straighten up and look around the deck, you see that nothing has changed, that all your small adjustments and inspections have left the boat exactly as it was before. And this is precisely the point. The gear is not fixed because it was broken, but touched because it is there. A quiet communion between the oysterman and his tools, a way of saying that you are ready even though there is nothing to be ready for. The boat rocks very gently on the ebb tide, the boom sways a few inches, the water laps against the hull with that same steady rhythmic pulse, and the iron tongs rest in their chocks. The hand dredge hangs on the bulkhead, the culling board sits on its horses, all of them silent and waiting and perfectly at peace. You draw a long, slow breath, filling your lungs with the cool, salt air, and you let it out just as slowly, watching the plume of white drift away across the deck. And you feel a quiet, wordless satisfaction settle over you, the satisfaction of a man whose small world is in order, whose gear is sound, whose boat is ready for whatever the bay might bring, even if what the bay brings is nothing but another hour of this same endless, peaceful calm. The other boat appears so gradually that you cannot say when you first saw it, only that at some point between checking the tree nails and wiping the block sheave you lifted your eyes to the horizon and found it there, a tiny dark speck against the pale grey seam where the water meets the sky. The speck is so small and so far away that it might be a flaw in your vision, a mote floating on the surface of your eye, and you blink once, twice to clear it, but it remains. It is a boat, a skipjack by the look of her sails the same weathered tan as your own, her hull a dark, low shape that rides the water with the same easy familiarity, and she is perhaps 2 miles off, maybe a little more, the distance impossible to measure with any accuracy because the air is still thick with the last of the morning haze. You stand by the port rail with your hand resting on the smooth, worn wood, and you watch the boat without any particular intention, your gaze settling on it the way your gaze has settled on the Marsh Islands and the distant shore and the color of the water. A quiet, undemanding attention that expects nothing in return. The other boat is moving on a course that parallels your own, heading south-southeast along the edge of the Oyster Rock, and its speed is the same as yours, a slow drifting pace that is barely more than the speed of the tidal current. You can tell this because the relative angle between your bowsprit and the other boat's mast does not change, the two vessels holding steady in their positions as if they were fixed points on a map, the water moving under them at the same rate and in the same direction. This parallel movement gives the scene a strange static quality, as if you are both standing still while the bay slides past beneath you, and you feel a quiet kinship with this distant vessel, this stranger who is not a stranger because he is a waterman like yourself, up early on a calm November morning, his dredge probably stowed, and his lead line probably coiled, and his hands probably resting on his tiller, just as yours are resting on the rail. The two of you could be mirror images, reflections of the same life cast onto the water 2 miles apart, and this thought is not a lonely one, but a comforting one. A reminder that the bay is large enough to hold you both in a mutual, wordless understanding of what a quiet morning means. The other boat's sail is set just as yours is, the gaff peaked up to catch the light northerly air, the canvas drawing in a smooth, easy curve, and you can see now that the boat is slightly larger than yours, perhaps 40 feet on deck, with a higher cabin trunk and a longer bowsprit that points toward the hidden sun, with a faint, dark elegance. The mainsail has a patch near the leach, a lighter square of newer canvas that catches the light differently, and you notice this detail with the same quiet interest with which you notice the spider's web on your own hand. Dredge, a small, human mark on a landscape of water and sky. The boat's wake, if it has one, is invisible at this distance. The surface of the bay too calm and too vast to show the passage of a single vessel, and so the boat seems to glide without effort, a dark shape on a silver field, its motion as smooth and silent as the drift of clouds. You do not hail the other boat. Do not raise your arm or wave your cap or blow a signal on the tin horn that hangs from a lanyard by the companionway, because there is nothing to hail about. The water is calm. The wind is light. No one is in distress. And the etiquette of the bay in a morning like this is a quiet one. A respect for the silence and the solitude that does not require filling with shouts and whistles. You know the other waterman has seen you, just as you have seen him, because the eyes of a waterman are trained to spot anything that breaks the horizon, any speck of color or shape that might be a boat or a buoy or a floating log. And you know that he is watching you with the same idle, undemanding attention with which you are watching him. The two of you are company for each other across the water. A silent, distant company that asks no questions and tells no tales. Just two men on two boats on a calm November morning, each one going about his own quiet business. After a while, perhaps 10 minutes, perhaps longer, you lift your hand from the rail and raise it slowly. A single, simple gesture that you make without thinking about it. A flat palm held at shoulder height for the space of 2 breaths. It is not a wave, not the kind of urgent flapping gesture that a man makes when he wants to attract attention, but a quiet acknowledgement, a sign that you've seen the other boat and the other boat has seen you, and all is well. You do not expect a response at 2 miles. The other waterman almost certainly cannot see your hand against the dark background of your own sail, and yet you watch for one anyway, your eyes fixed on the distant deck, looking for any movement that might be an answering signal. There is none that you can see, only the steady, shadowed shape of the other boat against the grey water, but you imagine that he has lifted his hand too, that the two of you have exchanged this tiny, invisible greeting and gone back to your separate silences. The thought is enough, and you lower your hand and let it rest again on the rail, the wood cool and familiar under your palm. The other boat's course carries it slowly to the east, edging toward the shore, while your own drift holds you more toward the west, and over the span of the next half hour, the distance between you begins to open, the gap widening so slowly that it is only by looking away and then looking back that you can measure the change. When you first saw the boat, it was a finger's width above the horizon, and now it is a finger's width above and a thumb's width to the right, the angle having shifted as your paths diverge, the two vessels tracing a long, slow V across the face of the bay. The other boat's mainsail has begun to foreshorten, its shape changing from a broad, tan wing to a narrower, darker rectangle as the boat turns slightly away from you, and the bowsprit that was so clearly visible a while ago has begun to merge with the hull, the two shapes collapsing into a single dark silhouette that is smaller and smaller with each passing minute. You watch this slow diminishment with the same calm acceptance with which you have watched everything else this morning, the mist thinning and the watercolor changing and the marsh islands sliding past, and you feel no sadness at the other boat's departure, no sense of loss or loneliness. The boat was there and now it is going, and that is the way of things on the bay, a place where solitude is the natural state and company is a passing gift, a small temporary island of connection in a sea of quiet. You are glad that the boat appeared, glad that you lifted your hand and imagined an answer, and now you are content to watch it go, to let the bay reclaim its emptiness and restore the solitude that is as much a part of your morning as the salt air and the cool breeze and the slow, steady rocking of the deck under your boots. The other boat shrinks by degrees, its silhouette growing less distinct as the distance swallows the details, the patch on the sail the first to go, then the cabin trunk, then the bowsprit, until all that remains is a dark, vertical line that might be a mast or might be a trick of the light on the water. You squint slightly, your eyes narrowing against the grey brightness, and you hold the dark line in your gaze for as long as you can, a tiny vanishing thread of connection to the other waterman, who is now miles away and moving further, his own gaze probably fixed on some new detail of his own quiet morning. The dark line wavers, flickers, and then it is gone, swallowed by the haze that still hangs low over the water, and the horizon is empty again, a seamless, silver-grey band that stretches from shore to shore with nothing to break its continuity. You let out a breath that you did not know you had been holding, a long, slow exhalation that drifts away in a white plume and merges with the grey air, and you turn from the rail and walk back to the stool by the mast, your boots making their familiar soft thud on the deck planks. The tiller is where you left it, the smooth, worn oak fitting into your palm as if it had been shaped for your hand alone, and you settle onto the stool with the same slow, easy motion with which you have done everything this morning, your body finding its balance without thought, your eyes returning to the water ahead. The bay looks the same as it did before the other boat appeared, a flat, calm expanse of silver grey that stretches away to a haze-softened horizon, and yet it feels different in some small, indefinable way, a little larger, a little quieter, a little quieter, a little quieter, sans the sky. You think about the other waterman, about where he might be heading and what his morning might hold, and the thoughts are idle and drifting, with no more weight than the wisps of mist that still cling to the water in the far distance. Perhaps he is heading for a creek further down the shore, a sheltered anchorage where he will stow his gear and row ashore and walk up a muddy path to a house that looks much like your own, with a chimney that smokes faintly and a door that opens onto a warm, dim kitchen. Perhaps he will record his day in his own damp ledger, writing calm, overcast, light air in his own cramped hand. And perhaps he will sit by his own stove as the evening comes on and think about the boat he saw on the bay, the small tan-sailed skipjack that drifted past him on a parallel course, its waterman lifting a hand in a greeting that was too small to see. The thought warms you, a small private warmth that has nothing to do with the temperature of the air, and you carry it with you as the boat drifts on, a quiet, companionable spark that glows in the back of your mind and asks for nothing but to be remembered. The wake of the other boat, if it ever existed, has long since healed, the surface of the water closing over its passage with the same smooth, seamless finality with which it closes over everything. There is no sign that the boat was ever there, no track to follow, no mark to point at and say, "Here passed another man on this calm November morning." The bay holds its secrets close, erasing the evidence of every passage with the patient work of current and wind and time, and you are content to be one of those secrets, a fleeting present on the water that leaves no trace. The other waterman is a secret too, a ghost of the morning who appeared and vanished, and left behind only the memory of a dark sail and a lifted hand, and the two of you will never meet, never speak, never know each other's names, and yet you have shared something, a quiet hour on a quiet bay under a quiet sky, and that sharing is enough. You adjust the tiller slightly, a tiny correction that keeps the bow pointed toward the distant creek mouth, and you settle deeper into the stool, your shoulders relaxing, your hands resting loose and easy in your lap. The empty horizon stretches before you, grey and calm and infinitely patient, and the boat moves across it at the speed of the ebbing tide, a slow, steady progress that asks nothing of you but your presence. The other boat is gone, the morning is half spent, and the bay is as still as it has ever been. A great, breathing silence that holds you in its palm and rocks you gently toward the afternoon. You close your eyes for a moment, just a moment, and when you open them again, the horizon is still empty, the water is still calm, and the world is still at peace. The burlap sack rests against the port coaming where you left it yesterday, its coarse, brown fabric stained dark with the moisture of the oysters it held, its mouth twisted shut and tucked under its own weight. It contains perhaps 2 bushels of oysters, the harvest of a previous morning when the wind was right and the tide was right and you felt like working, and they have been sitting in the cool, damp bilge of the boat ever since, kept alive by the air that circulates through the loose weave of the burlap and the water that drips from them slowly, steadily. A saltwater seep that has left a dark, irregular stain on the deck planks beneath the sack. You walk over to it now, your boots making their soft, familiar sounds on the wood, and you crouch down beside the sack, resting one hand on its rough, damp surface, feeling the hard, lumpy shapes of the oysters through the fabric, the edges and curves and irregular contours that press against your palm like a bag of stones gathered from a beach. The smell that rises from the sack is the smell of the bottom, a rich, briny, mineral scent that is the distilled essence of the Chesapeake, and you breathe it in without thinking, the way a baker breathes in the smell of flour or a carpenter breathes in the smell of fresh-cut pine. You lift the sack by its ears, the short loops of rope sewn into the top corners, and you carry it across the deck to where the culling board waits on its sawhorses, the white oak plank, scarred and smooth by years of use. The sack is heavy, the oysters shifting inside with a dull, clunking sound, a deep, hollow clatter of shell against shell. That is one of the oldest sounds in your life, a sound you have been hearing since you were a boy learning the trade from your father. You set the sack down beside the starboard sawhorse, easing it onto the deck with a careful, controlled movement that keeps the oysters from cracking against each other. And then you straighten up and stretch your back, your hands pressing against the small of your spine, the wool of your coat pulling across your shoulders. The culling board is at waist height, the perfect height for standing work, and you position yourself before it with your feet slightly apart, your weight balanced, your body ready for the slow, rhythmic labor that is about to begin. You untwist the mouth of the sack and fold the burlap back over itself, creating a wide opening that reveals the oysters inside. A dark, glistening mass of shells packed tight and wet and smelling of the sea. The shells are every shade of grey and brown and white, some with a faint bluish bloom, others with a roughness like old stone, and they are caked here and there with patches of the dark, silty mud that you remember from the bottom where you dredged them, the same mud that the sounding lead brought up from 6 fathoms. You reach into the sack and lift out a single oyster, your fingers closing around its irregular layered shell, feeling the sharp edges and the smooth patches and the slight, living weight of the creature inside. The shell is wet and cool, and water drips from it onto the culling board in small dark splashes that spread and then slow, the dry wood drinking the moisture. You place the oyster on the board and reach for another, and then another, until you have a small pile of perhaps a dozen oysters in front of you, the water from their shells pooling in the slight hollow at the center of the board. A hollow that your hands have worn into the oak over thousands of mornings, just like this one. The copper culling ring hangs from its leather loop on your belt, and you take it now, feeling its familiar weight, its smooth, cool circumference, the slight greenish patina that has grown over the copper where your fingers do not touch it. The ring is 3 inches across on the inside, exactly the legal minimum for a market oyster, and you have measured 100,000 oysters with it, maybe more, your hand moving in the same practiced motion that is as automatic as breathing, as automatic as the rise and fall of the tide. You pick up the first oyster from the pile, turn it over in your hand, examining its shape and size before you ever bring the ring near it. This one is a good-sized oyster. Its shell thick and heavy, its edges sharp with the layered, papery growth that marks a healthy creature, and you place the ring over its longest dimension, watching as the ring slips easily over the shell with room to spare. It is a market oyster, legal and large enough, and you set it to the left side of the board, the beginning of the keep pile. A pile that will grow slowly through the morning and eventually be measured into bushel baskets and taken ashore. The sound it makes as it touches the board is a soft, solid plack, the sound of shell on wood, a clean, definitive note that says this one is good, this one is ready. The second oyster is smaller, its shell more rounded, less heavily ridged, and when you place the ring over it, the ring sticks at the widest point, the copper catching on the rough surface and refusing to slide further. You try the ring in the other direction, across the narrower axis, and it slips through easily. But the law says the oyster must pass the ring in any direction, and this one does not. It is a sublegal oyster, a cull, and you set it to the right side of the board, away from the keep pile. A small shell that will go back into the water to grow another year. You pick it up again for a moment, looking at it more closely, noting the fine, concentric lines of its growth, the pale, violet edge of new shell that it has added in the last few months. And you see that it is a healthy oyster, a fast grower, the kind of oyster that will be legal by next fall if the crabs and the drumfish leave it alone. This thought is a quiet satisfaction, a small, private optimism about the future of the rock, and you place the oyster back on the cull pile with the same care you used for the market oyster. The process continues, one oyster after another, your hands moving in a steady, unhurried rhythm that is its own kind of clock. You pick up an oyster, turn it, feel its weight and shape, measure it with the ring, and place it on the appropriate pile, the motions flowing together into a single, continuous act that requires no thought, no decision, only the gentle, practiced operation of your hands and the copper ring. The oysters are all slightly different from each other, each one a distinct individual shaped by its own small patch of bottom, its own angle to the current, its own slow history of growth and survival. Some are long and flat, their shells shaped like the palm of a hand, the kind of oyster that grows in strong current and has to cling low to the rock. Others are round and cupped, their shells curved deeply into bowls that hold the seawater and the meat together, the kind of oyster that grows in stiller water and has room to build upward. A few have barnacles attached to their shells, small white cones that are closed tight against the air, their sharp, calcified tops rough under your thumb. One has a tiny oyster growing on its back, a spat no bigger than your smallest fingernail, its shell translucent and pale, and you note this with a quiet interest, because it means the rock is healthy, that the oysters are reproducing well, that next year's harvest is already beginning. The cull pile grows slowly on the right side of the board, the smaller oysters waiting to be returned to the water, and you take a moment now and then to pick one up and examine it more closely, checking for dead shells or damaged edges or the telltale drill holes that mean a snail has been at work. A dead oyster has a particular feel, a lightness, a hollowness that you can detect the moment you lift it, and you find only one in the entire sack. Its shell slightly parted, its meat dried to a thin, dark shadow inside. A shell that has been dead for weeks and came up in the dredge only by accident. You set this one aside as well, but not with the culls, in a separate spot by itself, because a dead oyster will not grow back no matter how long you leave it in the water, and it is better to return its shell to the bottom where it can serve as culch, a foundation for new spat to settle on. The drow-hole oysters, the ones attacked by the snail that bores through the shell and eats the meat inside, are still alive but damaged, and you find two of them, their shells perforated by tiny, perfect circles that look like they were made with a small auger. These you set with the market oysters, because the meat inside is still good, still edible, the snail having taken only the part it wanted and left to the rest. You work your way through the pile of oysters on the board, reducing it one by one, and when the pile is gone, you reach into the sack and bring out another dozen, placing them on the board in the same loose, wet grouping, the water dripping from their shells onto the wood, the rich, briny smell rising around you. The rhythm of the work is a comfort, a steady, repetitive motion that occupies your hands while your mind drifts free, wandering out across the bay to the horizon that is still hidden in haze, to the other boat that vanished an hour ago, to the marsh islands that are now far astern, to the color of the water and the feel of the air and the slow, patient turning of the tide. You are not thinking about the oysters in any conscious way. Your hands are doing the thinking for you, sorting and measuring and placing with an accuracy that comes from years of practice, years of standing at this same board, on this same boat, under this same grey November sky. One of the oysters in this new batch is a curiosity, a shell that has grown around a small pebble, incorporating the stone into its own structure. The grey, smooth roundness of the pebble embedded in the rough, layered grey of the shell like a jewel set in a ring. You hold this oyster for a little longer than the others, turning it over, feeling the strange hard bump of the pebble under your thumb, marveling at the oyster's indifference to its own deformity, the way it simply built around the obstacle and kept growing. The oyster passes the ring easily, a legal oyster despite its unusual shape, and you place it on the keep pile with a gentle, almost affectionate motion, a small acknowledgement of its strangeness. Another oyster has a spat of seaweed growing from its hinge, a delicate, branching structure of pale brown that is dry now, but was once living, and you pull the seaweed off with a gentle tug and drop it over the side, watching it float on the surface for a moment before it sinks. The keep pile on the left side of the board has grown to a substantial mound, a heap of perhaps 3 dozen oysters, their wet shells glistening in the grey light, their shapes a jumble of curves and points, and rough concentric ridges. The cull pile on the right is smaller, perhaps a dozen undersized oysters, their shells paler and smoother than the market oysters, their edges sharp with new growth. Beside the cull pile sits the single dead shell and the 2 drill-holed survivors, and next to those is a bucket of bay water that you brought up earlier with a leather bailer, the water cool and clear, faintly green, smelling of the deep creek. You will put the culls into this bucket, keeping them alive in the water until you can return them to the rock, a small act of stewardship that you perform without thinking because the oysters are the crop and you are the farmer, and a farmer does not waste his seed. When the sack is half empty, you pause and straighten up. your back making the same soft, popping sounds it made when you first kneeled by the sack, and you roll your shoulders slowly, feeling the pleasant, dull ache of standing work. The slight stiffness in your neck from looking down at the board. You wipe your hands on the scrap of flannel in your pocket, the fabric rough and damp and stiff with salt, and you look out across the bay for a long moment, letting your eyes rest on the distant hazy line where the water meets the sky. The light is still grey and diffuse, the sun still hidden, the air still cool and still, and the bay is as calm as it has been all morning, a sheet of pale silver green that stretches away forever, empty of boats, empty of birds, empty of birds, empty of everything but the slow-breathing swell that rocks the boat in its steady cradle rhythm. You take a drink from the stone jug, the water cool and mineral-tasting, and you replace the cork with the same soft, muffled pop, the sound traveling no further than the rail, swallowed by the vast, quiet openness around you. The second half of the sack goes faster than the first, because the rhythm has fully settled into your body, the motions flowing together with a smooth, effortless efficiency that is its own kind of peace. Your left hand reaches into the sack, your right hand holds the ring, your eyes measure and judge, and the oysters move from sack to board to pile with a quiet, steady regularity. A soft, clacking procession of shell and water, and the faint, musical jingle of the copper ring on its leather loop. The cull pile grows a little larger, the keep pile a little taller, and you work through the last of the oysters with the same unhurried care with which you worked through the first, treating each shell as an individual, each one worthy of your attention, each one part of the slow ancient cycle of growth and harvest that has shaped your life and the lives of everyone you know. When the sack is empty, you stand for a moment with your hands resting on the edge of the culling board, looking at the two piles you have made. The keep pile is a satisfying mound of dark, wet shells, perhaps 1.5 bushels in total, enough to fill a basket and take ashore to the buy-boat when it next comes around, enough to pay for the flour and the coffee and the coal that you will need before the winter is over. The cull pile is a smaller, paler heap of young oysters that will go back to the rock and grow another year, adding their own layers of shell and their own measure of meat to the bay's slow, patient abundance. You pick up the bucket of bay water, and one by one you place the culls into it, feeling each small, wet shell slip into the water with a soft plop, the oysters settling to the bottom of the bucket in a loose, dark cluster, their shells still slightly parted from the stress of being out of the water, their pale, living flesh visible as a faint, glistening gleam inside. When all the culls are in the bucket, you carry it to the rail and pour it gently over the side, the water and the oysters spilling out together in a slow, smooth stream, the oysters falling through the air with a tumbling, awkward motion, and then disappearing into the grey-green bay with a series of small, soft splashes that close over them immediately, erasing them from sight, returning them to the bottom, where they will wait for another year, another season, another calm November morning, with a dredge and a board and a copper ring. The light has begun to dim by the time you turn the boat toward the creek mouth, the grey overcast deepening from the pale silver of midday to a softer, darker shade that carries the first hint of evening in its tone. The sun remains hidden behind the cloud, as it has been all day, and there is no sunset to speak of, no blaze of colour on the western horizon, only a gradual, gentle fading that is more a thickening of the air than a loss of light. You sit on the stool by the tiller with your hand resting on the smooth, worn oak, and you watch the water ahead as it shifts from grey-green to a deeper, cooler grey, the colour of slate, the colour of a winter sky reflected on a still pond. The ebb tide has been running for hours now, pulling the boat steadily toward the creek, and you have let it pull. The sail still set, but barely drawing, the boom swaying gently as the wind falters and then returns, a soft, intermittent breath that is cooler now than it was at noon, carrying with it the first faint chill of the coming night. The marsh islands that you passed earlier in the day are now astern, their brown shapes receding into the haze, and ahead of you the creek mouth opens between two low points of land, a darker gap in the shoreline that you know as well as you know the shape of your own hand. When the creek mouth is 100 yards ahead, you decide that it is time to lower the sail, and you make the decision in the same quiet, unhurried way you have made every decision this morning. not with a sharp, sudden thought, but with a slow, gradual realization that the moment has arrived. You nudge the tiller over with your knee, bringing the boat's head into the wind, and the sail begins to luff gently, the canvas flapping with a soft, rhythmic sound that is the sea's equivalent of a contented sigh. You walk forward along the deck, your boots finding the familiar path between the coaming and the mast, and you release the peak halyard first, letting the line run slowly through your hands as the gaff tilts downward, the sail folding itself in a series of slow, graceful collapses that spill the wind and reduce the canvas to a loose, billowing curtain. The sound of the halyard running through the block is a low, groaning murmur that you have heard 1,000 times, a sound that means the work is done and the boat is coming home. The throat halyard follows, and you lower it hand over hand, feeling the weight of the gaff and the bundled canvas settle into your arms, a heavy, familiar weight that pulls against your shoulders and back in a way that is almost pleasant. A final, gentle exertion before the day's labor is complete. The sail comes down in slow, deliberate folds, the tan canvas spilling onto the deck in a heap that smells of salt and linseed oil and the faint, clean scent of the wind that has filled it all day, and you guide it down with your hands, making sure it falls where you want it, that no part of it trails over the side or tangles with the lines. When the gaff is fully lowered and the sail is resting on the deck in a loose, manageable pile, you make the halyards fast to their cleats with the same careful figure eights you used this morning, the rope lying neat and flat against the wood, and then you begin to furl the canvas, folding it onto the boom in long, even rolls that you tie down with the canvas stops, each one pulled tight enough to hold but not so tight that it strains the cloth. The stops are still damp from the morning mist. The short lengths are lined cool and slightly stiff under your fingers, and you tie each one with the same small, precise knot, a knot that will hold through the night and release easily in the morning when you come back to raise the sail again. With the sail furled and the gaff secured, the boat loses its forward motion and begins to drift on the tide alone, the current carrying it slowly toward the creek mouth, and you walk aft to the lazarette and lift out the long sweep oar, a heavy, 10-foot oar of straight-grained ash that you use to scull the boat when the wind fails or the channel is too narrow for sailing. The oar is worn smooth at the grip, its shaft polished by your hands to a dull, golden gleam, and its blade is darkened with water and age, the wood frayed slightly at the tip where it has pushed against 100 muddy bottoms. You fit the oar into the notch on the transom, a deep, rounded groove that holds the shaft at just the right angle for sculling, and you begin to move it back and forth with a slow, rhythmic motion, your whole body rocking gently with the movement, your wrist turning the blade at the end of each stroke to keep it from dragging. The oar makes a soft, gurgling sound as it moves through the water, a quiet, liquid rhythm that is the only sound on the boat now, and the boat responds by turning its head toward the creek mouth and gliding forward at a slow, steady pace, the water parting around the bow in two smooth, silent curves that meet again at the transom. In a faint, swirling eddy, the creek mouth opens before you, a wide, dark gap between the marsh banks, and you steer the boat into it with small, gentle adjustments of the oar, your body moving in the same slow, rocking rhythm, your eyes fixed on the water ahead. The banks on either side are low and brown, covered with the same dry cordgrass that you saw on the islands, and the grass rustles in the faint breeze with a soft, papery sound that carries across the water like a whisper. A few bare trees stand on the higher ground above the marsh, their branches a fine dark lacework against the dimming sky, and among them a single light flickers, a tiny, warm spark that is the first lamp being lit in a farmhouse window, a sign that the day is ending for others as it is ending for you. You watch the light for a moment, your hands still moving the oar in their steady automatic rhythm, and then you return your gaze to the channel ahead, the dark water that leads home. The pier appears through the dimness as a long, low shadow stretching out from the bank, its pilings darker than the water, its planks just visible as a straight line against the mud of the shore. You scull the boat toward it with the same unhurried pace, the oar moving back and forth, the water dripping from the blade in small silver drops that catch the last of the grey light before falling back into the creek. The boat glides alongside the pier with a gentle bump, a soft, muffled thud that is more a touch than a collision, and you ship the oar, lifting it clear of the water and laying it along the deck where it will be out of the way. The pier is the same pier you left this morning, its planks dark with dampness, its pilings crusted with barnacles, its cleats and coils and worn spots, exactly as they were when you stepped onto the boat at dawn, and yet it feels different now, quieter, more settled, as if the day has drawn it deeper into the peace of the November evening. You step up onto the pier with the same easy, practiced motion you have made 1,000 times, and you tie the boat to its cleats with the same damp rope you coiled this morning, the same rope that has been in your hands 12 times today, its fibers soft and familiar, its smell the smell of the creek in the mist and the long, slow hours on the water. The knots you make are the same knots you always make, a bowline forward and a cleat hitch aft. Each one snug and secure, each one tied with the same careful, unhurried attention you have given to every small task since you rose in the dark and walked down to the pier. The boat settles against the pilings with a soft, creaking sigh, the hull rubbing gently against the wood, and you stand on the pier for a moment with the rope still in your hand, looking back at the boat that has carried you through the day, its deck tidy and its gear stowed and its sail furled on the boom, a small dark silhouette against the dim silver grey of the creek. You coil the extra line on the cleat, the same simple flat coil you made this morning, and you set it down with the same quiet care, the rope lying on the damp wood in a neat, tight spiral that will not tangle in the night. The ledger is still in your pocket, the stub of pencil beside it, and you take them out and hold them for a moment, the brown paper cover cool and damp under your fingers, the pages crinkled with moisture, and then you put them back without writing anything more, because the day's entry is already complete, the date and the weather and the note "no dredging today," all recorded in your small, careful hand, a record that may never be read by anyone but you, and yet is complete. A small private monument to a day that asked nothing. The lantern hangs from its hook by the companionway, its glass chimney dark and cold, its wick dry and untrimmed, and you do not light it. There is no need for a lantern on this pier, on this evening, in this familiar darkness that you could navigate blindfolded. Every board and every piling and every coil of rope known to you in such detail that your feet would find their way without a single misstep. The darkness is not absolute, not yet, because the sky still holds a faint, diffuse glow, a last, lingering remnant of the hidden sun that filters through the overcast and reflects off the water, creating a soft grey-silver twilight that is enough to see by, enough to move by, enough to finish the small, final tasks of the day without hurry or strain. The lantern will stay dark, as it has stayed dark on 100 other evenings when the sky was too calm, and the night was too close, and the walk home was too familiar to need a light. The water sucks gently at the pilings, a soft, rhythmic sound that is the same sound you heard this morning, the same sound you have heard every morning and every evening for as long as you can remember, a sound that is the voice of the creek itself, a quiet, liquid breathing that marks the turn of the tide and the passage of the day and the slow, steady pulse of the world. You listen to it for a long moment, standing still on the pier with your hands in the pockets of your coat, your fingers finding that same scrap of rope, the same small, rough piece of hemp that you have been turning over and over all day, and the sound wraps around you like a blanket, a familiar, comforting presence that asks nothing and gives everything. The water rises and falls, the tide still ebbing, still flowing out toward the bay, and the boat rises and falls with it, the hull creaking softly, the mast swaying a few inches against the dim sky, the dredge resting on the gunwale with its iron frame dark and still and patient. A small bird whistles once from the marsh grass, a single, high, clear note that hangs in the quiet air and then fades, leaving the silence deeper than before. You do not see the bird, cannot see it in the dimness, but you know its song, a song you have heard on 100 evenings, a song that means the day is over and the night is coming, and the world is settling into its rest. You listen for a second note, but none comes. The bird has said what it needed to say, and now it too is still, tucked into the dry grass with its feathers fluffed against the cold, waiting for the dawn that is still hours away, still lost on the other side of the long, dark, quiet night. The mist is beginning to form again over the water, a thin, pale haze that rises from the surface like a breath from a sleeping mouth, and it drifts across the creek in slow, languid ribbons that wrap around the pilings and curl into the marsh grass and dissolve into the dim air. It is the same mist that you watched at dawn, the same soft grey veil that clung to the water and then lifted and then vanished, and now it is returning, recomposing itself out of the cooling air and the warmer water, a cycle as old as the bay itself, a cycle that has been repeating for thousands of years and will repeat for thousands more. You watch the mist form and drift and reform, your eyes tracing its slow, graceful movements, your mind as still and as calm as the water it rises from, and you feel a sense of completion, a quiet, wordless sense that the day has come full circle, that the mist at the end is the same as the mist at the beginning, and that you have moved through the hours between them with the same slow, patient, unhurried pace as the tide. The path up from the pier is a narrow, muddy track that winds through the marsh grass and up the low bank to the house that sits among the bare oaks, its windows dark, its chimney smoking faintly against the grey sky. You walk the path with the same slow, steady pace with which you have done everything today, your boots finding the familiar stones and roots without your eyes having to look, your body moving through the darkness as if it were daylight. The marsh grass brushes against your trousers with a soft, dry rustle, and the smell of the mud rises around you, the same rich, loamy smell that has been in your nose all day, the smell of the creek bottom and the marsh and the slow, patient work of the tide. The house is warm and dark and quiet, its door opening onto a kitchen that smells of wood smoke and coffee and the faint, clean scent of the wool coats hanging by the stove. And you will go inside and sit in the chair by the fire and let the warmth soak into your bones. And you will think about the day that has passed, the mist and the dredge and the sail and the other boat and the culling board and the copper ring, all of it a single flow of quiet moments that have added up to a life. Behind you the boat rests against the pier, its deck empty and its gear stowed and its dredge resting on the gunwale, the iron frame cold and dark and still, the mesh bag hanging slack and empty and smelling faintly of the bottom, a scent that will linger in the fibres for weeks, through rain and wind and whatever weather the winter brings. The mist thickens over the water, filling the creek with its soft grey presence, and the marsh settles into silence, the bird asleep, the wind gone, the tide still ebbing, still flowing out toward the bay, a slow, steady current that pulls the water away from the land and into the vast, dark emptiness of the Chesapeake. The Oyster Wars are somewhere far away, a distant rumour of boats and men and guns that has nothing to do with this creek, this pier, this boat, this quiet November evening that holds its peace like a held breath. A small, perfect world of water and wood and wool-grey sky that is complete in itself, whole, finished, at rest.